This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people have so much to gain and have such an imperial motive to put me in a position I'm in. We'll never let the true facts come of their boards to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader? Don't remember his name. You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
Now these people are in very high positions,
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 210. I am your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, we are continuing the winding, dark, complicated saga of CONTRA 8, All is Clouded by Desire. And I think, when we left off, we were reading through Alan Bloch's book by the same name, and I think we had stopped right before chapter 3. And we had already encountered quite a bit of shenanigans from, our main subject in this book, Bruce Rappaport, right?
Yes. Yeah, we'd seen a dizzying array of shell companies with identical sounding names.
This Palestinian-born international Jewish businessman who is best friends with Bill Casey and a lot of other people. I mean, this guy's social penetration into business and political and intelligence circles around the world was quite massive, as we're going to see. But we still haven't really gotten to like the meat of the matter and the main subject of this book and the subject of CONTRA 8, which I think is actually going to probably be a jumping off point to subsequent Contras after that, because this is such a huge topic. But, that is what happened in Russia in the 1990s in what was probably the greatest capital flight robbery in modern history of a nation's assets and resources. And specifically, Alan Bloch is laying out what role Bruce Rappaport and that august institution, the Bank of New York, played in all of that, right? Mm-hmm. And, maybe some people connected to the Bank of New York. But anyways, I think today we want to finish up going through Alan Bloch's book. And I also do want to pull a little bit from a book that I referenced last time, but I finally got to read all the way through. And this is going to play a similar role, I think, that, in CONTRA 7, we had Alan Bloch's Masters of Paradise, and then also Gus Russo's Super Mob, that I think we started reading from in part 3, where we did our mini history of the Great American Fortunes on the Chicago Super Mob. But there's a similar dynamic, I think, going on here today, where just like in Super Mob, Red Mafia by Robert I. Friedman, which came out in 2000, is a little more of a colorful rendering of a lot of the same historical period that, is talked about in All is Clouded by Desire. Red Mafia is mostly focused on these Russian emigre mafia figures that established themselves in America, starting kind of in the late 1970s and into the 80s, but really exploding in the early 90s. And while it does, I think I mentioned last time, have some pretty annoying anti-Soviet assumptions kind of baked into parts of the book, when it's just talking about like the thug state of the Soviet Union and like how you had to be a criminal to just survive in this stupid fucking corrupt communist country that nobody believed in, and blah blah blah. There's like a lot of that kind of like stuff going on early on in it that I don't love. But if you can stomach your way through that, there's actually still a lot of really good information, and perhaps that is evidenced by what Friedman talks about in the book's opening, which is learning that he had a hit had been put out on him by Semyon Mogilevich as a result of, I guess, some reporting that he did. He did a profile on Mogilevich, I think, in the Village Voice in the late 90s.
Wow.
Which got him on the international gangsters' radar. So, just like Alan Bloch's book, like in the beginning when he starts asking his friend who was involved in the Profumo affair, about Bruce Rappaport, she said, I like you guys, but you really should not do this. Like, he's a very dangerous man, and he's connected to the Mossad. And so, both these guys ventured into journalistic territory that, as we'll see, could be incredibly dangerous, like in the 1990s. But, we'll get to that in a little bit, because there's some really interesting stuff. But we'll start out here in Chapter 3 in Alan Bloch's book. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a recap from Contra 7, talking about, our favorite Bahamian bank, Castle Bank, right? But he's going to sort of summarize, do a quick recap of all the stuff he laid out in Masters of Paradise. But this time, he's going to tie it to our mystery man, Bruce Rappaport, and show that actually these two institutions, Rappaport's Inter-Maritime Bank and Castle Bank, were very intertwined pretty much since, the beginning of all that in the 1960s. And that might cast a little more light on the real significance of like the Castle Bank milieu, because I hope people didn't walk away from Contra 7 kind of assuming that, like, okay, this sus mafia CIA bank got set up in the Bahamas by Paul Helliwell and these crooked Chicago lawyers, and then they, funded these Cold War ops, and they stole all of Credence's money, and et cetera, et cetera. And then, they kind of like dispersed to the winds, and like they stopped being influential at some point. Not so fast. I think, as we're about to find out, they did not scatter to the winds after they stole all of CCR's money. In fact, that was, merely a prelude to the things they would be involved in next. So, all right, without further ado, I think we're just going to jump in. Yeah. Chapter 3, The Underworld of Banking and Financial Fraud, Inter-Maritime and Castle Bank. So first section, the original owners of Inter-Maritime Bank. Until the Pertamina scandal, Bruce Rappaport was not widely known. However, helping to cripple Indonesia's economy did attract a great deal of attention that revealed the Geneva banker as a prime mover in the underworld of financial crime. The formation of his Inter-Maritime Bank in 1965 reveals the particular social world of banking within which he flourished. Inter-Maritime Bank had both A and B shareholders. The bulk of the A shares, 74%, were owned by Rappaport either in his own name or as a representative of two of his own companies, Forinco, Foreign Investment Company Establishment, and Holz Chemie Anstalt, located in Liechtenstein. The remaining 26% was owned by Edward Phillip Barry, an American living in Zurich, Switzerland, Klaus Ulke Polstra, who represented a Dutch bank called Bank M. van Emden, Rolando Zappi from a Swiss bank named Weisskredit, and David Salomon Hodara, representing Sofigest, Société Financière S.A. Barry, Polstra, Hodara, and Zappi held virtually equal amounts of shares. Hodara was deemed a, quote, stateless person by the Geneva police in 1964, most likely because he was a Jew from some formerly Nazi-occupied country. He became a director of Sofigest in 1964 and an important shareholder in Rappaport's Inter-Maritime Bank when it was formed the following year. Let's see.
Yeah, this is like the book is like very weirdly formatted. The sort of ebook that we have,
right?
So there's like multiple pages that are
thwarted.
Just blank for no reason.
Right.
Yeah.
So apologies there.
Yeah.
He talks about attorney André Guinand, the president of Sofigest for a number of years. During the 60s, joined with Rappaport in several of his various endeavors. Guinand has been described as a key political figure in Geneva from the 1930s through the 70s, serving for a time as Speaker of the Swiss National Council, the equivalent of the House of Representatives. The Vice Credit Bank was owned by Rolando Zoppi and his brother Elvio, very close to the Swiss-Italian border. Interesting. Financial writer Nicholas Faith, in his acclaimed Safety in Numbers, The Mysterious World of Swiss Banking, names both of these towns, Como and Lugano, as basically, both towns as home to Vice Credit. Whichever it was, the Zoppi's bank was a well-known laundromat for flight capital from Italy. It had been censured in the U.S. in 1969 for breaking margin requirements on stock purchases. Swiss authorities closed it down in 1978. Bank van Emden, situated in Amsterdam, had been started by Meyer van Emden, who was in his late 70s when Intermaritime was formed. By that time, Polstra was the director, and Van Emden, one of the 7 trustees, 3 others of whom were Israeli citizens. In October 1970, British bankers discovered that Bank van Emden was either a subsidiary or an affiliate of Banque Occidentale, owned by James Goldsmith, who became Sir James for a comparatively short while before he died in 1997. The bankers reported that Van Emden was disliked by other Dutch banks, for it was suspected of pushing Bernie Kornfeld's crooked mutual fund creation, Investors Overseas Services in Holland. Remember, we did talk about that in Contra 7.
Yeah,
There's
a lot of
there was like a
crossover
Vesco
with
thing.
some of these people who start to pop up, like at this point, like Paul Helliwell,
right,
et cetera. Yeah.
Now this is also interesting. Kornfeld's empire, situated in Geneva, had exceedingly close ties to U.S. organized crime, particularly the infamous Meyer-Lansky syndicate, and to Rappaport, who it is said once bailed Bernie out of a Swiss jail. As for Intermaritime's B shares, they were evenly divided between Edward Phillip Barry and Klaus Utke Polstra, each holding 863. So they say a little bit about this E.P. Barry guy. The most interesting stockholder was E.P. Barry, who had been a U.S. military intelligence officer in the OSS during World War II. By the end of the war, he was the head of U.S. Counterintelligence X-2 in Vienna. Okay, another very heavy hitter, right?
Yeah.
Like head of X-2, those are the
Vienna,
people that were...
pretty important place.
I do remember when I was watching that, you'll see a clip of this in the latest Demon Forces video that I edited, but in the BBC Gladio documentary from the early 90s where they interview Licio Gelli, the head of P2, he describes being visited by U.S. X-2 agents, like at the very end of the war, where he had been a liaison to an SS unit, and they were like very nice to him, and they asked him to write down his entire life story from his first communion to the present, and then they asked him if he wanted to be parachuted into northern Italy to be like a guerrilla fighter, like the next week. And that was, that was X-2, which was run by this guy who was deep in bed with Bruce Rappaport.
Did he run the entire X-2 counterintelligence? Because that's like really significant. But that's like he ran it in Vienna, like he was the head of operations in Vienna.
Let me check that real quick, because that actually would be massive if he was the head of all of it. But wow, he was also the 44th Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts. Wait, really? No, that might be his father. Hold on. Interesting. There's another Edward P. Barry, who was, different guy. Edward P. Barry Jr., Lieutenant. There's a Lieutenant General in the Air Force, Edward P. Barry Jr. I wonder if that's his son. Yeah. Edward P. Barry. There's another New York Times. Interesting. This guy is not popping up.
It's very weird. Like when I first searched E.P. Barry, I thought he would come up right away, but instead I got like hits on some show called Barry. like
the show where Bill Hader is like a hitman?
Yeah, I believe so. Unless it's about Obama's childhood.
Right. Okay, I'm on ca.gov now. Interesting how like it's showing me a bunch of, this is just a coincidence, but the first 2 hits are Kodama Yoshio Volume 2, which actually doesn't have Barry's name in it, but he is actually connected to this. Here we go. CIA and Nazi war crim.
Yeah, I just found
Colonel Chapman draft working paper 001.
Right.
Edward. Yeah. Okay. Major Edward P. Barry, chief of Psi/A, as X-2 was formerly known.
Oh man, there's a lot
from
of juicy
Chicago.
stuff
Oh shit! All right, interesting. What book is this from?
Declassified and released by Central Intelligence Agency. Sources, methods, exemption.
3B2B.
Yeah,
Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act.
Is this?
Oh my god.
Is this a legitimate thing? Like, hold on.
Well, we have to note that sometimes CIA.gov.
This is from CIA.gov. Yeah, well,
they'll do this where they will publish things from like Bloodlines of the Illuminati or something like that because it's just like part of their collection of like things that have been talked about. It's always interesting like what ends up, but it's not a you see that sometimes before. It's like you can look on CIA.gov and it has like schematics about like how you do remote viewing and it's all real and stuff, and it's like, okay, no, this is like a scan of kind of like a weird new age book,
right? It's kind of like
about remote viewing, which is still interesting. They have it, but like it's not the same thing as like the CIA
exactly.
Is
they have all
official.
Sorts of like, and a lot of that stuff like they did have interest in for sure, and like they did like think it would necessary to, but it's kind of like how on CIA.gov you can find all sorts of like Wahhabi like literature and things like that, or like like Salafi like extremist like things in Arabic, like because they collected that out of interest in the topic, obviously for clear reasons. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of when like people found like the Freedom of Information Act requests about like giants and stuff, like
right,
and they came out in the Hillary Clinton emails, and people thought that Hillary Clinton had made like requests for information about giants or something like that.
Exactly.
And it's like, no, those are just FOA a requests that any random person could make. But I'm trying to figure out who wrote this draft working paper. Like I
have no idea. It's very extensively footnoted, and it actually has stuff that is not in the book, but actually I think we maybe should read it because this is this sheds a little bit of light.
It does,
and it actually has a lot to do with Palestine. And let's not forget the end of World War II era is we're right before pre-Nakba. We haven't gotten to that in our series yet, but there's that. Oh my God, I'm looking at a lot of this.
Kevin C. Ruffner. This might be Kevin C. Ruffner.
Okay.
He wrote another book called a paper that's published in Studies in Intelligence in 2007, which is Project Symphony, U.S. Intelligence on the Jewish Bricha in post-war Austria. So I feel like that might be the final version of the paper.
Okay. So you think this is an academic paper?
I assume so.
Like
he was a historian for the Central Intelligence Agency. And the author, because they hire like people who are like historians and stuff to like do analysis. So yeah, he's the co-author of 2 volumes in the Virginia Regimental History series. An officer in the Army National Guard. He lives in Washington, D.C. So this might be
I mean, on the one hand, grain of salt, CIA historian. On the other hand, this actually is a case where we could kind of say this is like an official CIA like issue, like sort of commissioned like study about like they apparently hired this academic to write this book. Okay, I kind of want to.
I think
the Bricha, the Jewish Bricha sounds like it might be relevant here in terms of these milieus and perhaps how Edward P. Barry, who I think it does kind of clarify here, he was the head of Army X-2 in Austria.
Yeah.
So I mean, not
as X-2 was formerly known in Austria.
Right, right. So I mean, not, but also, well, okay. Allen Dulles was meeting with like Karl Wolff and stuff in Switzerland, but also Austria was like, I think Vienna. Think of the Third Man and that like post-war kind of thing. Like Austria was a hotbed of intrigue near the latter part of the war.
Gets into that, for sure.
Okay, and it might explain where the fuck somebody like Bruce Rappaport came from and how he ended up knowing the head of Army X-2, who ended up serving on one of his like shell company boards. 20, 30 years later. Wow.
Yeah.
In the mid-70s.
Some of this is stuff that we might even want to return to when we go back to The Land Belongs to Whom It Belongs. There's
absolutely.
Like
I think we just...
Too.
Oh my God. Terror out of Zion.
Good bibliography here, too, that he has, actually.
Wow. The Haganah, they're terrorist organizations. Okay.
Yeah.
No, actually, for the Nakba episodes, I think this is actually going to be relevant. All right, I'm just going to start reading this chapter 11, American Intelligence and the Jewish Bricha. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming that's kind of how you say it, right? Bricha?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I assume,
Brichah, for anybody who wants to Google that. So they write, throughout late 1945 and early 1946, the Strategic Services Unit received reports from its stations in Europe about a Jewish underground movement in Europe, known collectively as the Bricha, or the Escape, Couriers of the Jewish Agency, including members of the Jewish Brigade serving with the British Army, escorted Jews from Eastern Europe to safety in the West with the goal of bringing them to Palestine. The estimated 1 million European Jews who had survived the Holocaust posed a serious health issue for the Allies, but, more importantly, a resettlement problem. Many had lost their entire families, and few wanted to return to their homes, even if they still existed in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. Outbreaks of anti-Semitism in Poland and elsewhere pushed thousands of the remaining Jews from Eastern Europe into the Western Allied occupation zones in Germany and Austria. The Zionist movement, which had its origins decades before the war, now acted as a siren for Jews to leave Europe for the British mandate in Palestine. The British policy, however, called for the restriction of Jewish immigration into Palestine. Thus, the movement of these refugees from Europe, either by illegal or legal means, became an important weapon in the Jewish resistance against the British in Palestine. As the flood of Jewish refugees poured out of Eastern Europe through Germany and Austria to Italian ports, American intelligence discovered that the Soviets were trying to infiltrate these migration channels to smuggle Russian agents into the Middle East. According to an X-2 report from Paris in February 1946, the Soviets dispatched agents into the British and American occupation zones in Germany and Austria. Posing as Jewish victims of Nazi concentration camps, these agents would be processed through Allied displaced persons channels and infiltrate the secret Jewish smuggling rings. Interesting. The Soviet agents planned to spread rumors throughout Europe and in Palestine that the British hated the Jews and supported the Arabs for control of the Holy Land. Ultimately, the Soviets wanted to draw the Jews closer to communism and incite them to revolt against the British in Palestine, according to an intelligence report given to the Americans by the French. In addition, the report listed the addresses and meeting places and names of numerous Jews in Austria involved in the smuggling of refugees in that country. Other reports also discussed Soviet efforts to exploit the Jews. A summary of a Burn report, for example, highlighted the Soviet penetration of Jewish organizations in Austria by using the black market to raise funds. Wow, Captain James J. Angleton, I believe that is James Jesus Angleton, head of the X-2 in Italy, reported on Jewish escape efforts in January 1946. It's very significant that he was head of X-2 in Italy. He cited sources that claimed the Russians were actively assisting the Jews to flee from Poland. Angleton relayed information that the Russians had provoked the Poles to attack the Jews in an effort to discredit the Polish government, to force the British to face the question of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, and to justify Soviet repression in Poland. In other dispatches during the first half of 1946, Angleton submitted Italian intelligence reporting on Jews transiting that country en route to Palestine, including the names of ships that carried the Jews from Italian ports. As concern mounted about Soviet efforts to infiltrate the Bricha, X-2 in Washington proposed that its field stations penetrate the Jewish underground to determine the extent of the subversive activities. Maybe this is where something started, perhaps. The ideal agent for this mission in early March 1946 would be a non-communist Jewish refugee willing to go to Palestine. Once recruited, the American agent should be, quote, advised to participate fully in communist activities in Austria, Germany, or Italy, short of violence. Of more importance than how the Soviets planned to spread their propaganda in Palestine, SSU wanted to discover detailed information regarding the escape routes, the identities of agents and their contacts, the locations of their hideouts, the extent of their finances, and the sources of their falsified documents. Washington felt that this project could prove critical in understanding the modus operandi of the Soviets, and it encouraged the field to submit projects for review in Washington. So now here we go, Project Symphony, where we get introduced to the guy who brought us here.
Yes.
And actually, even before Washington sent its message, X-2 in Austria considered the Jewish Bricha to be a target. Major Edward P. Barry, the chief of Psi/A, as X-2 was formerly known in Austria, later recalled, quote, this office began laying plans for a project, which was to use the present extensive Jewish emigration for a source of CIA information. Preliminary investigations on the subject plainly showed that no one in the American forces in Austria had a clear picture of either the procedure or the agencies involved. Now, he the author just notes down here in a footnote, gives us a little more information about Edward P. Barry. They write that born in 1914 in Chicago, Edward P. Barry graduated from Northwestern University in 1936 after spending a he graduated from Northwestern University in 1936 after spending a year at the University of Freiburg in Germany, which would be 1935, which would be under Nazi rule, correct?
Yes.
Add him to the Betty Ford Aquino club, I guess, of just doing a little study abroad in Nazi Germany. Interesting. So he joined the U.S. Army in 1941 and rose to lieutenant colonel at the time of his release from SSU in late 1946. Barry first served with the Army's Counterintelligence Corps in the Middle East and in Italy, and later transferred to OSS as the head of X-2 in Austria. Following his return to civilian life, Barry attended law school at the University of Michigan.
Nice. Okay.
And then, I guess, got into business with Bruce Rappaport, right? Much later after that. So going on in this chapter, another interesting person. By early April, Captain Jules Koenig, a member of X-2's small base in Vienna, the main office was in Salzburg, submitted a proposal to headquarters, quote, to use the influx of Jewish refugees into Austria from Romania, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Poland for sources of CI information, for exact data on the intelligence service of the Jewish agency in Austria, and for all intelligence activities run by any persons or organizations who use this influx into Austria for such purpose. Koenig, born in Belgium of Polish Jewish parentage, had served with OSS as an army officer in the Middle East and in Italy. At the end of the war, he transferred to Austria and joined X-2 in Vienna. In his new assignment, Koenig observed firsthand the immigration networks flowing through the Austrian capital. Koenig emphasized that the Jewish underground flight was not a new phenomenon. The exodus of Jews from Russian-occupied countries, Koenig commented, is an exact replica of the vast legal or illegal emigration movement which began at the ascension of the Nazi Party in Germany around 1932. Hundreds of thousands of Jews fled Germany to find their way to any safe haven in Europe or, more importantly, in Palestine. As the Nazis shut down the legal movement of Jews from Germany and Austria, underground organizations aided the Jews to escape. Funded by outside groups, including the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, commonly called the Joint, or the JDC, the Hebrew Sheltering and Immigrant Aid Society, the political section of the Jewish Agency, and the Aliyah Bet, Jewish agents penetrated the Third Reich both to rescue the refugees and to collect intelligence during the war. These personnel later formed the basis for the Bricha in numerous European countries during 1945 and 46. According to Koenig, the various British intelligence services freely used the emissaries of this section, the Jewish Agency, for penetration, intelligence, and DA, double agent, purposes. The representatives of the AJDC acted as a liaison with the Allied intelligence services and eventually financed this courier cum intelligence service. In effect, Koenig saw the project, which he dubbed SYMPHONY, as a continuation of earlier wartime collaboration between the Allies and the Jews, and this time facing a new threat, the Soviet Union. In his proposal to headquarters, Koenig visualized SYMPHONY as having several immediate and long-term goals, both of an overt and covert nature. So now he lists these in a bullet point. These are interesting. The first one, immediate aims, overt. To extract information of CI value from refugees escaping from Russian-occupied territories, composition, trends, and activities of the communist parties in those countries, location and identification of concentration camps in Russia and Russian-dominated countries, identification of NKVD deserters or NKGB deserters, identification of NKVD agents or communist agents sent among the refugees, identification and elimination of Nazi elements. I like how that's like last. Identification and elimination of Nazi elements infiltrating amongst the refugees to escape punishment from the authorities of their respective countries. Next one, immediate aims, covert. To ascertain and locate the agents of the Jewish Agency in Austria who run both the emigration of Jews from Russian-dominated countries and a highly efficient intelligence service into those countries, to ascertain and spot those persons who smuggle Jews out of those countries for high sums of money and who, being in contact with NKVD officials, also smuggle war criminals and agents into the Allied occupied zones to work either in Austria or in Palestine. Immediate aims, covert, next section. To locate those persons within official organizations, such as the Hungarian Red Cross, the Austrian Red Cross, the Italian Red Cross, some so-called repatriation committees with official and semi-official status, the UNRRA and the Lublin Polish repatriation committees, who provide false papers and ID cards to those smugglers and to the smuggled for the furtherance of this traffic, to take all measures of security safeguard to eliminate or neutralize such traffic when it becomes a danger to the security of the Allied occupied zones or its establishments and units. And then finally, long-range aims, to penetrate those organizations of whatever kind they are, Jewish, political, or of intelligence nature of any country, which send Russian-trained or Russian-inspired agents through this flow of Jewish refugees to further propaganda or intelligence aims, either in Allied occupied zones of Austria or Germany, or in allied countries such as France, Italy, the United States, and or Palestine. Wow. So, wow. A lot going on there, right?
Yes.
It's interesting how it mirrors, I think, it kind of mirrors in a way the way Army X2 people were setting up the Galen org around the same time as, like, this is another type of network that was already ready-made and pre-existing that they could sort of activate, or perhaps, well, their goal was to recruit them, to act as intelligence assets and keep track of supposed, Russian infiltration. So let's see.
Yeah, and definitely it should be borne in mind, this is like certainly like a partisan account. Like this is like a pro-CIA account for sure. But even still, like you can kind of see the contours of things, and that it's still meant to like have some association with reality because it's it's meant to inform someone about something. So it's not
right. This does strike me as the kind of thing that like people in the CIA would read that is not exactly intended for like public consumption.
Yeah, or or it has a close enough relationship to reality to be useful while still certainly taking the CIA side of the matter. This guy actually has a whole book called like The Eagle on the Swastika, which is about the CIA collaboration with Nazi war criminals. But
really?
he definitely kind of takes a stance against like the sort of broader criticism of that. It's kind of trying to like explain and exonerate the
like
CIA.
Look, I know it looks bad, but like we had to do it kind of thing. It's but he ponders it, like, was it the right thing? It's that kind of thing. So because that's definitely a hot potato subject that you would want anybody in the employment of the agency to handle delicately. But nonetheless,
he goes through like all the bullet points of all the criticism, and he says things like the CIA evacuated Nazi war criminals through quote unquote rat lines in southern Europe, allowing these people to escape justice by relocating them incognito in South America. But this is like part of a list of things that he's trying to, I guess, rebut or at least qualify or contextualize. According to the General Accounting Office, the Central Intelligence Agency did not have a formal or even an informal program to bring Nazi war criminals or collaborators into the United States. The agency did bring defectors from Iron Curtain countries and provided, quote, disposal services for American agents from Europe. In some cases, these defectors or agents also had Nazi pasts, but this did not constitute a basis for U.S. support or assistance. Oh, okay.
Whatever. Whatever, buddy.
Great. Nice.
All right.
So, you can see, all right, so maybe, that...
They didn't bring them because they were Nazis. They just happened to be Nazis. It's such a big difference.
Right, which is, not really true. They didn't bring them because of their Nazi ideology, but certainly necessarily, maybe in some cases, but certainly the fact that they were Nazis mattered, and certainly that was part of the calculus and why they were valuable.
Right.
Because if they hadn't been highly
loyal
ranked
asset.
Nazis,
Like they wouldn't turn on you and go to the Soviets because they hated the Soviets more than anybody. So
yes, and they also
they're Nazis,
had access to all of like the information that the German government had during that time, like in all their like scientific advancements and that such as they were and things like that, and all their intelligence, things like that. So to say that it was immaterial they were Nazis like doesn't really make any sense, but yeah,
exactly. Well, tough job, tough gig working as the CIA historian, trying to twist that one around. So yeah, I mean, it kind of goes that like Koenig like focused in on this particular guy named Arthur Peer, who was like a smuggler, and he thought was part of this like he gave him the code name Conductor, and thought that this guy was like a critical node in the Bricha, So he tried to pose as a journalist, and then like approached Peer posing as a journalist, but then revealed he was an American intelligence officer.
And by utilizing the Bricha in Austria, the Strategic Services Unit sought to uncover Soviet efforts to penetrate the flow of Jewish refugees to Palestine. Yet the project ended far differently, far differently is what he meant. Typo. I guess it is a draft, so. Far differently than anticipated, and while it lasted only a few months, Project Symphony marks a first but unrecognized step in the development of one of the CIA's oldest and most important liaison relationships in a troubled region of the world. Yeah, what he's talking about is I guess he means that I'm trying to see where to start reading here.
Did you see the part about this guy that just down here, Erich Vender? Who is like the guy that Koenig chose to be like his infiltrator. And this guy definitely has an interesting background in intelligence, but he was an agent for both the Germans and the British during the war. He was born in Austro-Hungary, and he was an engineer who had immigrated to South America in 1928, but then moved back to Austria. He was arrested by the Gestapo in 1939 as a Jew, but was not sent to a concentration camp. Instead, the German Abwehr used Vender, known as Karol Popescu, as an agent in the Middle East. He was dispatched to Istanbul en route to Syria, where he was to collect military information for the Nazis. Vender, however, turned himself over to the British in Turkey and was doubled. He also became an agent of the Joint and established a courier network in Eastern Europe. Vender, along with several other Jews, smuggled letters from the JDC in Istanbul into Hungary, while also providing British feed material to the Germans. So he was like a double agent. And then Vender made some 12 trips from Budapest to Istanbul between 1941 and 43, when the Germans arrested him for communicating with the enemy. He was held in captivity until early 1944, but transferred to an insane asylum after he was declared mentally incompetent following a suicide attempt. When he learned that the Gestapo planned to interrogate him again, Vender tried to escape from Budapest, but he was betrayed to the Germans. He admitted all of his activities on behalf of the Joint to the Gestapo and was held in Vienna as a prisoner until the Soviets entered the city in April 1945. The Russians then used Vender as an interpreter for an intelligence unit until his release after the German collapse. Vender accepted a position with the Joint in Vienna, but was later arrested by the American military in Vienna as a black marketeer. That's a wild ride.
Yeah.
Working for like literally everybody. Oh,
right.
Okay. So a little more here about him. This is interesting. In April 1946, X-2 in Austria sent a cable to Washington requesting that Vender be vetted as an agent for Project Symphony. Koenig, in fact, had already commented on Vender's potential usefulness to the new project and the need to get him out of confinement. Quote, "Inasmuch as he is a fervent Zionist," Koenig wrote, "and has a very extensive knowledge of the Joint and the Brichard," misspelled, organizations, he may later be, quote, "sprung and used in Project Symphony." Through Koenig's intervention, the U.S. Army conducted a, quote, mock trial of Vender, and he was sentenced to 90 days in jail for his participation in the black market. Rather than being remanded to prison, Koenig took custody of Vender and informed him that he now worked for American intelligence. In his new task, Vender, now designated as Lilac, would be Project Symphony's conduit to collect on the Jewish agency and penetrations by the Soviets as well as the British. Captain Koenig would pay Vender 750 shillings a month and provide some rations for his work. Yeah, I guess the headquarters accepted him as an agent with some reluctance. Aspects of his background raised questions as to his honesty and willingness to play all sides. Yeah, I mean, I could get that. So yeah, like
He
Koenig
was a
continued to like
fervent
stick up for
Zionist,
him.
so he could be trusted. Yeah, the other guy was Arthur Peer, who they ran
Right.
in Project Symphony, who's also pretty interesting. Yeah, just like for backgrounds.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
Simon Wiesenthal. Oh.
Yeah, he also comes up. Officially he was collecting items of Jewish interest for his newspaper employer, principally items on atrocities against Jews during and after the war. Actually, he ran a highly efficient intelligence net through couriers into Romania, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Poland. He was also running another net, this is according to Koenig, which tracks down Germans either free or in captivity in Allied occupied zones of Germany or Austria who are suspected or proven to have been committing atrocities against Jews during the war. Pierre then turns these war criminals over to the Allies while he collected evidence for the Jewish agency. But they had some doubts about him as SSU. The SSU station in Cairo replied that it could find no information on the man. In fact, Cairo confirmed that Pierre never worked for the British Security and Intelligence Middle East and that his press card was false. As a result, Cairo station advised Vienna to proceed with caution. That's kind of the context for the closing of Project Symphony, according to this paper anyway. A 16-page review was scathing in its criticism of the project. Headquarters felt that the two main agents had significant black marks in their past, especially Vender, who had made a fortune as a courier between Turkey and Eastern Europe during the war. After questioning Captain Koenig upon his return to Washington before his release from the army, headquarters learned that Koenig's description of Pierre had proven misleading. It turned out that Koenig and Pierre had met each other during the war and not, as Koenig had suggested, in Vienna. Likewise, headquarters also learned to its dismay that Captain Koenig had himself been affiliated with the Jewish agency prior to his joining the army. All right. For his part, Pierre operated in a conspiratorial manner, while the Bricha has been more and more associated with, if not actually sponsoring, certain terroristic groups in a desperate effort to attain its aims. Pierre's own methods, as seen by Washington, were strong-arm and unethical. Those who opposed him were simply taken care of or liquidated. Koenig's own sympathies for the plight of the Jewish refugees and his growing reliance on Pierre for intelligence appeared to give sanction to the illegalities being committed by the Jewish underground in Austria. Pierre also had not lived up to his offer to arrange a desertion of Michael Pines, the NKVD major mentioned in Koenig's project proposal in April. Instead, the Polish Jew was arrested by army authorities during the roundup of illegal immigrants in Vienna and held on weapons charges. The information that he subsequently provided did not justify Koenig's obtaining Pines' release from jail and his removal to Munich. Two other incidents raised questions about the security of the project. In mid-May, Captain Koenig met a man who claimed to be a Russian scientist employed by the Soviet military in Austria. This man, known as Donsky, wanted to leave Austria as quickly as possible with his wife and travel to Palestine. While Donsky stated that he would not reveal all of his information about his work for fear of being branded a traitor, he offered to supply general details about life in the Soviet Union. Koenig agreed to his proposal and began to make arrangements to have Donsky transported to an army plane to Italy. When headquarters learned about Koenig's steps on behalf of the Russian, it ordered its Viennese representative to drop all contact with him. SSU feared that Donsky's supposed defection was a ruse orchestrated by the Soviets to catch the United States in an unfriendly act toward its ally. Likewise, Koenig's withholding of Pierre's alleged source in the British headquarters in Austria became a matter of contention between SSU officials in London, Vienna, and Washington. Altogether, Helms and Williams felt that the intelligence procured by Project Symphony had been low grade and could be procured through the open press. The Bricha had been the main beneficiary of the exchange, and it appeared that Koenig had fallen under Pierre's sway. The balance sheet of what Pierre had gained by his affiliation with X-2 in Vienna far outweighed any benefits to the United States. Even more troubling, Koenig's work had, no doubt, come to the attention of the British in both Austria and Palestine. The diplomatic ramifications of if the British exposed the American operation would be simply too great. The review advised the abandonment of Project Symphony as it had been first conceptualized and evolved over time, while headquarters did not roll out a new covert project to penetrate the Jewish immigration. It did not seem feasible given the circumstances. The Vienna base, reprimanded as a result of the Washington Review, acknowledged in early October that Project Symphony and the use of Pierre had come to an end. Despite promises made to army officials to continue to exploit the Jewish Bricha, a lack of case officers effectively closed that approach. While SSU was able to provide some information to the military, the G2, or intelligence staff, of the United States forces in Austria, supported by the 430th Counterintelligence Corps Detachment, hereafter furnished the bulk of the reporting on the Jewish underground following Project Symphony's demise. The Central Intelligence Group, which assumed SSU's foreign operations in the fall of 1946, dropped contact with Erich Vender after a fall report in October 1946. Arthur Pierre, however, did not drop out of sight. In late January 1947, Peer met with a CIG officer in Vienna and complained the United States had cooled off toward him. Peer, in turn, was told that he had not been forthright in providing information to the United States and that there was no way that the large numbers of Jews coming from Eastern Europe could not escape without some type of cooperation on the part of the Soviets. The American representative informed Peer that the U.S. Army's Counterintelligence Corps was now responsible for collection of information from refugees. In order for Peer to continue to work for the Americans, he had to agree not to impose any demands on the Army. Peer again stated that he wanted to cooperate with the Americans, but was not in a position to engage in straight intelligence. After this point, Peer was turned over to Harris Green, the deputy chief of the CIC office in Salzburg, and then there's a white spot, which is, I guess, redacted. Peer's performance as a source for the Army also proved disappointing.
Yeah. There are some redactions all up in here.
Yeah,
that's crazy that Koenig and Peer they knew each other during the war.
Yeah,
they had this secret relationship.
Yeah, so this is what Edward P. Barry's office in Vienna was doing, I guess, or this is one of their operations. But yeah, this is just the conclusion, but it's pretty interesting here, where it gets into sort of deeper significance. Peer's departure from Austria to Palestine the summer of 1947 ended the short-lived relationship between American intelligence and the Bricha. Arthur Peer, however, remained active in intelligence circles long after the formation of the State of Israel in 1948. He took the name of Asher Ben Nathan, also known as Ben Natan, and served as Chief of Operations Branch of the Political Department of the Foreign Ministry, Ha-Malacha Ha-Medinit, the intelligence wing of the Israeli Foreign Service under Boris Guriel. Ben Natan operated at first in Israel and then moved his operation to Paris. Competition among the intelligence services, including the political division of Shin Bet, or the General Security Service, the Israeli military intelligence, however, pitted Guriel and Ben Natan against Reuven Shiloh, who had been named by Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion as the advisor on special duties to the foreign minister and the chairman of the coordinating committee of the intelligence services. After months of haggling, Shiloh persuaded Ben-Gurion to place all intelligence under his control as head of Hamasad Latim, better known as the Mossad, or the Institute for Coordination. The Mossad assumed the collection of foreign intelligence and disbanded the Foreign Ministry's political department. Shiloh, in effect, fired the political department's head, Guriel, leading to the quote-unquote spies revolt in March 1951, when Ben Natan and other members of the political department resigned en masse and destroyed their records as opposed to turning them over to the new Mossad. All right. Ben Nathan's self-imposed exile from intelligence did not last long. In 1953, Ben-Gurion appointed Ben Natan as the general manager of the Israeli-owned Red Sea and Coda, a meat and shipping company in the French colony of Djibouti on the Horn of Africa. The company ostensibly purchased beef and lamb in Ethiopia for ritual slaughter and export to Israel. This is also fucking reminding me of BCCI. What is going on with the sus, halal, and kosher butchery industry? It seems like there's a lot of weird stuff that goes on around that. Because wasn't there something with BCCI where they were involved in obtaining halal meat for people in Suriname or something? I don't remember exactly.
I forget who was involved in that, but it was actually not halal. It was somebody was scamming.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
Wasn't in South America they were
so. That's why,
sourcing it from there and pretending that it was halal. You're right. There's a lot of susness in that international market. Also, the Israel making little deals around Africa is something that also, not just a meat company, but a shipping company that's gonna pop up
exactly.
A lot in the book
in Ben Natan's mission was to monitor shipping movements into the Red Sea and to ensure that Israel's maritime lifeline remained unobstructed by the Arabs. In September 1956, Ben Natan received an urgent message to leave for Paris, where he served as an Israeli representative with the French and British governments, and as the three countries plotted to seize a newly nationalized Suez Canal company from Nasser's Egyptian regime. Ben Nathan, or Ben Nathan, I'm assuming that it's pronounced in some kind of exotic way, but
of course.
I don't think but maybe it is just, maybe I should just say Nathan. But anyway, Ben Nathan's main role, as opposed to planning the military campaign, was to arrange for the transfer of French nuclear technology to Israel, thus allowing it to become the first nuclear power in the Middle East. Wow. Ben Nathan went on to hold positions of power in the Israeli government, including head of the Israeli Defense Ministry purchasing mission to West Germany in 1957, director of the Ministry of Defense from 1959 to 1956, Israel's first ambassador to West Germany from 1965 to 1969, Israel's ambassador to France from 1970 to 1975, political advisor to the defense minister from 1975 to 1977, and consular to the prime minister from 1984 to 1986. An author and the recipient of many rewards Ben Nathan was an unsuccessful candidate for the mayor of Jerusalem. In 1999, Ben Nathan resided in Tel Aviv and was the chairman of the Ben-Gurion Foundation and president of the Israel-German Association. Project Symphony had a dampening effect on the establishment of liaison relations between the United States and Israel. Until 1951 did the CIA agree to cooperate with the new Mossad. In part, the Americans remained concerned that the Soviets had penetrated the infrastructure of the Israeli intelligence security services. Consequently, exchanges between the two services remained mostly of a counterintelligence nature, explaining in part why James J. Angleton, the chief of CIA's counterintelligence staff, retained control of the Israeli liaison account until 1973. Angleton, along with Koenig, had been the first American intelligence officers to report on the smuggling of Jewish immigrants through Italy to Palestine in 1946. Lost in the haze surrounding the birth of Israel, Project Symphony provides a glimpse of how American intelligence tried to get its bearings at the beginning of the Cold War. By utilizing the Bricha in Austria, the Strategic Services Unit sought to uncover Soviet efforts to penetrate the flow of Jewish refugees to Palestine. And then this is what I said before, it ended far differently than anticipated, and while it lasted only a few months, marks a first but unrecognized step in the development of one of the CIA's oldest and most important liaison relationships in a troubled region of the world. Yeah,
sure
pretty
does,
crazy.
I guess.
Yeah, so there you go.
Yeah.
And that was
Lot
all
of
run
intrigue,
out
wow.
of the Sky A or X2 office in Vienna.
Run by future Rappaport business associate Edward Phillip Barry.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think, that was a live read. We literally just found that.
We just
but I
discovered
think
that as
that
we were
does
searching for-
add a little interesting context to what we're going to keep getting into in terms of what is maybe this network that, what is the nature of this network that Rappaport seems to be very plugged into? And you see there's a lot of, connections there with Palestine, and, Bruce Rappaport was born in Haifa, right?
Yes.
During the Mandate period.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, naturally, the kind of smuggling sort of networks that would have developed during World War II, to help Jewish refugees get out of Eastern Europe. Those would be a natural kind of thing that intelligence services might want to tap into, right? Because clandestine services, especially. So, that was all very interesting, but now let's jump back into the original source now. Knowing a little more about E.P. Barry and certain, I don't know, networks he might have been aware of.
Yeah, or certainly he was aware of them. I mean, I don't know if he kept like track of those people like through, their entire future careers, but he definitely was aware of them at one time because he signed off on the whole thing and like reported on it to his own superiors.
And perhaps other people were aware of, and I think what was discussed there still sounded pretty protean, that they did describe that kind of a group in Europe as having basically like a sophisticated intelligence apparatus.
Yeah.
Despite not really being, a government agency of any kind. But he was also aware of other networks that we are familiar with. So going on here in chapter 3 in Alan Bloch's book, he says the most interesting stockholder of Inter-Maritime Bank was E.P. Barry. Bloch writes, when Inter-Maritime was formed, Barry was also one of a very select group of individuals with an interest in a Florida bank holding company called HMT and later Florida Shares. That company owned two small and interrelated Florida banks, the Bank of Perrine and the Bank of Cutler Ridge. Both were intimately linked to the notorious Castle Bank in the Bahamas, owned primarily by crooked American lawyers. Castle Bank had two poles of ownership and management, which, of course, real heads know, but we'll repeat this. Mm-hmm. One was in Chicago with attorney Burton W. Kanter and his firm, Levenfeld and Kanter. The other in Miami, where the main force was the stout, chain-smoking, asthmatic Paul Lionel Edward Helliwell, the chairman of the Perrine Cutler Ridge Banks. That Barry was a key shareholder in both Florida Shares and Inter-Maritime at approximately the same time, and was a longtime associate of William Casey, according to a Castle Bank officer, that's another thing to throw on, naturally raises the issue whether Rappaport himself was in business with the Castle Bank proprietors, Kanter and Helliwell. The short answer is yes. The long answer follows, which discusses the backgrounds of Kanter and Helliwell, the origins of Castle Bank, its parent and crony, the corrupt Mercantile Bank and Trust of the Bahamas, the crimes of both Castle and Mercantile, their relationships with organized crime, and the enduring association between Kanter and Rappaport. Because we all remember, right, that Helliwell died he dropped dead in like 1976, but, Kanter persisted for many decades after. So, we've already kind of gone, it's actually... This is a good reiteration of the level I think we talked about previously, of like just the level Paul Helliwell was on, because he wasn't just like an OSS guy. Just like Barry, he was actually kind of high up. So, he was born in Brooklyn in 1914, went to University of Florida, got his law degree in 1939. In his last 2 years in law school, he joined the ROTC and was appointed a second lieutenant upon graduating. And then he was called to active service in 1941. Military intelligence was his specialty. He served in the Army's G2 intelligence group in the Middle East. There we go again with the Middle East connection. And then transferred to the OSS as Chief of Intelligence in China, commanding 350 Army and Navy personnel and thousands of Asians, earning several high decorations. When the OSS disbanded at the end of the war, Helliwell became chief of the Far East Division of the Strategic Services Unit of the War Department until the spring of '46. This was an interim intelligence unit bridging the gap between the OSS and the CIA, which was created in 1947. After Helliwell was mustered out of the military, he joined a small Miami law firm, Bouvier, Helliwell & Clark, specializing in real property, insurance, tax, trade regulation, and similar matters. General corporate law kept the firm moderately busy. The rest of Helliwell's time was taken by the CIA. Initially, his CIA activity centered on Asian issues, and he worked with the famous and controversial Major General Claire Chennault, known as an acerbic warrior, at odds with his superiors for decades. Chenault was one of the first proponents of the Southeast Asian domino theory of communist expansion. The doctrine went like this. Mao's victory in China would result in massive communist support for Ho Chi Minh and Indochina, causing the French to fall. Then, like tipping dominoes, the regimes in Thailand, Burma, Malaysia, and perhaps India would topple to the communist, etc. I think we talked about that last time, where basically Chenault was the one that wanted to keep bombers on Taiwan so that he could bomb Mao and everything. Oh yeah, he talks a little about another few more familiar names here. The necessary logistical support for Chenault's dream to launch a war on the mainland would be furnished by certain civilian airlines. For example, the Civil Air Transport, which conveniently happened to be owned by Chenault and a partner. There were few takers in Washington for Chenault's plan, even though he had the lobbying help of attorney Thomas G. Tommy the Corcoran, an early FDR brain truster, zealously committed to New Deal politics until he found how lucrative the other side was. Corcoran then became known for sleazy influence peddling, questionable lobbying tactics, and backdoor deals. Chenault was stymied until Helliwell intervened. He broke the impasse by suggesting to Frank Wisner, a most important intelligence official, that he use CAT for Southeast Asian operations. The powerful and well-placed Wisner was in charge to the Office of Policy Coordination, a covert action organization somewhat tenuously tied to the CIA in 1948 and 49, but entirely within it a few years later. Wisner agreed and asked Helliwell to figure out a clandestine way to subsidize the airline, which at that moment was in desperate financial trouble. And I think we know where this is going. So in 1949, a formal agreement was reached between Chenault and a CIA representative. Helliwell helped construct the CIA's commercial cover org for the airline and its Southeast Asian covert missions. This front company was the Sea Supply Corporation, set up in Florida with its main office in Bangkok, Thailand. In 1952, Helliwell's law firm became general counsel for Sea Supply. That same year, Helliwell was made an honorary consul to the Royal Consulate of Thailand. Interestingly, years later, Rappaport would receive the same dubious honor. Helliwell, along with Wisner and Chenault, also worked CIA ops in Central America as early as 1953 and 54. In those days, the target was Guatemala and its government, which was overthrown by the agency. Helliwell was not yet finished with the CIA. During the preparation of what became known as the Bay of Pigs disaster, Helliwell was the agency's paymaster. The Bay of Pigs operation had brought together several of the CIA men who had triumphed in Guatemala and formulated much of the Thai campaign. Their common route was OSS China under Helliwell's command. So yeah, he was the commander of all of these guys that were in the specific East China station. The Far East China station during the war, which included, I think we kind of rolled off a list last time of crazy. I mean, not just Yair Klein, but Mitchell Warbell, John Singlaub, a lot of heavy hitting Wackel motherfuckers were all didn't just encounter each other during World War II, but all served together in the same place, right? So also, Helliwell also became a big political lawyer for the Republicans in the 50s. They called him Mr. Republican in Florida.
Right, I remember
and helped
this.
sway Florida more to the, Republican column. So now just a little bit of a tiny bio here on his partner, the Chicago connection, Burton W. Kanter. He said, he was born in Jersey City in 1930, went to the University of Chicago, graduated in 1951, and then got a law degree. He taught law for a few years at University of Indiana, then clerked for Judge Morton P. Fisher of the U.S. Tax Court, which I assume is where he learned some things. Then he joined the David Altman Law Firm in South LaSalle Street in Chicago in 1958, which was a firm that concentrated on federal taxation, estate planning, wills, and trusts. And Altman was a former IRS, basically an IRS official. And there were a bunch of other IRS guys, basically, that worked at this firm. That's where Kanter met Milton A. Levenfeld, who also went to U Chicago, and they both became partners. And then, I believe in 1964, they broke off and made their own firm, which became a powerhouse with exceptionally strong IRS connections. By 1972, the firm had grown in both size and prestige. The senior partners were Kanter, Levenfeld, Charles A. Lippitz, and Roger S. Basks, Kanter's brother-in-law, who I think was the one who eventually went down. He was like the one guy who went down for the Castle Bank stuff, right? But for like a very small potatoes kind of like stupid thing so that they could kind of say they slapped him on the wrist. So there were 15 lawyers working at Levenfeld, Kanter, Basks, and Lippitz in 1972, including Elliot G. Steinberg, who was titled a resident member of the firm practicing in San Francisco. One other Kanter partner was Joel Mallon, who worked out of Midtown Manhattan. I think the other book, Masters of Paradise, got into like a lot of like Joe Mallon as just like straight up mafia lawyer, basically. And, you know, his connections like the Meyer Lansky thing. So moving on. Castle Bank was formed in Freeport, the Bahamas, in October 1964 and placed, quote, on the shelf for a few years, ready to be used as at the appropriate moment. So, yeah, that's actually something he kind of emphasizes more in this book is not just shell companies, but shelf companies that, you know, you make these shell companies like in advance and you just kind of like put them away. You know, they're incorporated, but they have like no assets and like no activity. And then when you need one, you just go and like grab it and then it's like ready to go. So Castle Bank was sort of set up in that way. He says that the 1965 annual return for Castle showed some inconsequential personnel changes, along with one item of abundant interest, a Castle connection to the Mercantile Bank and Trust, which owned one of the 5 shares of Castle stock. So this, I think we did talk about this last time, but it's important. So the Mercantile Bank of the Americas Limited was registered in January 1962 and then changed its name to Mercantile Bank and Trust. The officers and directors were several nominees from the attorney's office, I. Gordon Mosvold, a Norwegian shipping magnate, and Keith Gonsalves, one of the original settlers in the Bahamas' newest town, the gambling mecca of Freeport. In 1965, Paul Helliwell became a mercantile director. That made Castle part of a Helliwell offshore banking complex, which also included the Bank of the Caribbean Limited, registered in December 1963 in the Bahamas. Kanter and Helliwell had known each other since the late 50s, having met while working on a deal between a Kanter client and one of Helliwell's. They both used Mercantile to establish accounts for a large number of their associates before Castle was taken off the shelf, and then later, during a large part of Castle's existence. In effect, and for a time, they ran parallel operations. This lasted until 1972, when Mercantile went into a financial tailspin, making it imperative to move certain accounts out of Mercantile and into Castle before they were wiped out. This was accomplished at the vigorous urging of Kanter, because amongst the accounts in peril was one held by Morris Kleinman, a notorious organized crime figure since the days of Prohibition. On this matter, Castle's president, Sam Pearson, the title of president actually meant very little, and Pearson's salary reflected that, stated that it had to be done, or, quote, Kanter will end up face down in the Chicago River. The depositors were not disposed to lose money. So yeah, even for a connected guy, I could see, is that why he stole all of Credence's money? Were we just being unfair to Bert, that actually like he would have just gotten whacked if he didn't steal all their entire fortune to make up for the collapse of Mercantile Bank? And I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. All speculation, total speculation. But that apparently was a fear, I guess. So Mercantile's downfall. This is actually a good thing to reiterate, the bailout of Mercantile. So Mercantile's downfall began as early as 1969, when the bank made several substantial demand loans to the numbered trusts of its own American investors and officials. The loans were used to purchase securities on a very large margin, which were traded on the American Stock Exchange. The securities were then fraudulently used as collateral for the loans. This scam fell apart when the stock market drastically declined and the value of the securities plummeted. Mercantile needed the loans repaid. However, the trusts couldn't cover the losses because various guarantors refused to honor their guarantees. Faced with catastrophic problems, Mercantile's leadership conspired to disguise and conceal the existence of the defaulted loans in order to defraud depositors and creditors of the bank. They filed phony reports and set up shell corporations, one in Panama and 2 in the Bahamas, to shuffle the disastrous loans around, attempting to create the impression that they were soundly collateralized. Now here we go. These next 2 paragraphs are something. The conspiracy took on a new dimension when officers from the International Bank, a bank holding company headquartered in Washington, D.C., with a branch in the Bahamas, decided to acquire 66.6... No, I'm just kidding. But they did acquire 66% of the capital stock of Mercantile in the Bahamas and its subsidiary in the Caymans. International's officers knew the actual state of Mercantile's financial health. During negotiations, they were told the bank recently had very serious losses, and much of the loan portfolio was tenuously secured by real property that was not, unfortunately, readily marketable. Unperturbed, they went ahead with the purchase, which closed at the end of March 1973. A couple months later, they knew the scam's every jot and tittle. Still, they didn't complain. On the contrary, they proceeded to lustily join in. The International had a reputation as a CIA bank, although it might have actually represented the interests of U.S. naval intelligence, particularly under the leadership of General George Olmsted, who became International's president in 1956. Yeah, this is exactly as we had surmised. This bank would also end up kind of getting tangled up in the BCCI scandal, right, in the 80s. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so yeah, Olmsted, interesting. Olmsted had a distinguished military career in both World War II and the Korean conflict, for which he was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal, Legion of Merit, Bronze Star, French Legion of Honor, and the British CBE. Wow. After VJ Day, Olmsted was in charge of the, quote, liquidation of U.S. military property in China and served as an economic advisor to the Chinese government, which I assume would be Chiang Kai-shek, right? The nationalists, right? Another guy on the China scene. During the Korean War, Olmsted became the director of the Army's program for foreign military aid and subsequently the director of military assistance for the Department of Defense. Now, here's something. I actually didn't know that he did this on purpose, but I think we had clocked it last time. Under Olmsted's direction, International Bank expanded overseas, acquiring, for instance, the International Trust Company of Liberia, which administered Liberia's maritime law. For shippers, Liberia was a godsend. There were no taxes, safety regulations, or union problems to worry about. And, better still, U.S. intelligence, which hunkered in the International Bank's various overseas ventures, was given an unparalleled inside line on the world's shipping. Further overseas expansion took place in the Cayman Islands, Trinidad, Barbados, Jamaica, England, Luxembourg, Belgium, the Netherlands, Beirut, Kuwait, and Hong Kong. In addition, from 1958 through 1977, the International Bank held the largest block of shares in Financial General Bank Shares, a major bank holding company with banks in Maryland, New York, Tennessee, Virginia, and D.C. In 1977, the Federal Reserve ordered the International Bank to sell all of its stock in FGB because of a legal problem that arose under the Bank Holding Company Act. Aga Hassan Abadi, founder of the criminal Bank of Credit and Commerce International, the notorious BCCI, had frontmen buy FGB's stock. Eventually, after one of the longest and most controversial banking dramas in U.S. history, FGB, then known as First American, was taken over by BCCI. What remained of Mercantile was drained dry through more fraudulent loans, totaling at least $17 million, made to 7 companies controlled by the conspirators. Here's another one that is, I don't think we noticed before, but this is very funny. These firms were primarily engaged in Florida land deals in the Orlando area, secretly purchasing acreage for the Disney Corporation as it planned Walt Disney World. Damn, okay, yeah, so Helliwell, I remember that Helliwell had that connection.
And thinking that was insane. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And also them taking Walt Disney out on a plane to survey the swamplands on the morning of November 22nd, 1963. There's some Dracularity there, that's all I gotta say. Castle
Camelot was destroyed, but the Magic Kingdom would rise.
Right? There's only room for one Camelot. Jesus. Yeah, so Paul Helliwell was all up in shady land deals to get the land for Disney World. Amazing. So anyways, so the corporate castle naturally played an important role in the bilking of Mercantile. The primary corporate villain in this round robin of fraud was a company known as Dhaka SA, which sat snugly as Castle Savings Account 504110. In summer 1977, more than 90% of Mercantile's claimed assets were actually uncollectible liabilities, too much for even the Bahamas. Thus, that August, the government revoked Mercantile's banking and trust license. This part of the game was over at last. So yeah, then it goes on a little bit about like a lot of real estate fraud that Castle was involved in. He says at the heart of Castle stood a huge real estate scam that was called International Computerized Land Research. Jesus, pinching ass title. The relationship between ICLR and Castle was fundamental. And let's see, there was Kanter owned shares in this, and people from the Helliwell firm, and also a guy named James Ferreira, who Block says was a fairly sleazy operator with a criminal record stretching back to 1926 when he was fined for running a whorehouse. He spent some time in prison in the 30s and 40s for violations of the Mann Act, having to do with transporting women across straight lines for immoral purposes. Yeah, so he ended up in partnership with all the people. Then they ran a scam. This other guy, McGowan, no relation, obviously. James McGowan and Ferrara started this like real estate scam in the high desert north of Los Angeles in 1964, where they would buy up a bunch of like shitty kind of desert land and then sell it to like investors in Germany, Switzerland, and Italy. And I guess the ICLR hoodwinked well over 2,000 Europeans. And it does note here, all the money was like squirreled away. The Kanter firm made most of the policy decisions concerning ICLR, such as authorizing the Castle comptroller to distribute the monthly cash statements of the partners to accountant Jerry Weiss in Chicago. In spring 1971, Kanter indicated how he wanted Castle to structure its reporting on ICLR accounts and investments. And then Kanter got mad at them in 1971 because I guess they were overdrafting their accounts or something, and these guys kind of start to steal from each other, and Kanter kind of like slipped away. Then he talks about we'll skip over the Dick Jaffe IRS Operation Trade Winds and all the corrupt banks, basically stealing money from like the Teamsters pension fund to finance casino construction in Las Vegas. Morris Kleinman from Cleveland. Yeah, there's so many, all these names. Basically, yeah, the Stardust Casino was one. Oh yeah, and it also does mention here again that the big weird thing from last time was, let's see, where is it? I'm looking for the mention of the acid guy. Here we go. Oh yeah, the IRS and Castle. Yeah, we should just like, especially with our secret machine music and everything, recently, it's worth reiterating the reason the IRS got turned on to the existence of Castle Bank was through like happenstance when the San Francisco IRS intelligence office in San Francisco had had arrested this guy, Allan George Palmer, also known as Alan Houseman, who's a manufacturer of LSD and a distributor of both LSD and marijuana in the San Francisco Bay Area since 1968. The IRS had at this time a program targeting narcotics traffickers, and it had zeroed in on the green-eyed, blonde, and mustachioed Palmer. Palmer and 3 others were arrested in Marin County, California, on October 17, 1971. Castle Bank was pulled into this affair when several checks that were drawn by Castle on an account it maintained at the American National Bank and Trust Company of Chicago were found in Palmer's possession. And then they went and like tried to pursue the money, and they looked up the Castle account, and it was a mix of basically a bunch of fake names like A. Alapronti, which was made up, and a couple other people like Wollstonecraft, AJT Gooding, and then PLE Helliwell and BW Kanter. Yeah, and actually I think it did say that like at one point like Palmer drove down to Florida to like hand deposit his LSD profits into like the Bank of Perrine and Cutler Ridge and all that kind of stuff. So still, still something that's pretty shocking, I feel like, underexamined is like, how did Castle Bank end up funding like this LSD guy? Like, that's not, you know what I mean? Like, this guy wasn't like an Italian mafioso. He wasn't, as far as we know, he wasn't, well, maybe like a direct like CIA operative or something like that, but he's just a random dealer. Like, it's I'd like to know more. And then I don't know,
of LSD and a distributor of both LSD and marijuana in the San Francisco area since 1968.
Kind of taking over, it sounds like, from when Owsley kind of had to like get out of the heat, got too big on him, and because he was the dominant one in like 65 to 67 roughly, and then I forget if he like he kind of like fled down to Los Angeles or was like on the run for a while. But this guy, damn, you know. And then the Brotherhood of, I think he the one. Oh no, it was Billy Mellon Hitchcock that hired Nick Sand and Tim Scully to like rationalize the production of LSD, and they made Orange Sunshine, which is distributed by the Brotherhood of Eternal Love Cult and the Hells Angels. So there were like two different tracks going on of like Silk Topper, and then if you put in Owsley and Melissa Cargill, like literally there's not a single like pipeline of LSD manufacturing that is not like Silk Topper controlled at the top. Like the three biggest ones were all controlled by. It's so fucking crazy, you know. But it just escaped, man. You know, it just like fucking escaped, like. You know,
yeah, I'm trying to
CIA
learn
was so
more
mad.
about Allan George Palmer, but there's really not much on him except for like what Peter Dale Scott has written about. Literally, the first hit for Allan George Palmer on Google is like our Contra 7, and then there's Peter Dale Scott, Alan Block, and then that's it, really.
I remember trying to look into his name when we did Contra 7, and I did find. God, I forget if it was like Alex Jones or something like that. Like a very weird, like a kind of sus conspiracy, like kind of show that had a guy on years ago that was like named Allan George Palmer. But I don't remember. I wish I had like watched it and I can't seem to find it now. But I remember it looked like this guy was talking about a subject that was like totally different from. You know, he was on to talk about like the globalist or something like that. Like it wasn't
weird name, a weird spelling of his name with 2 L's.
There is an Allan George Palmer that died. Well, he was born in 1882, so he would have probably been like a grandfather of like if they're connected, which I don't think they are. And I think it's Allan, right? Or is it Allen?
It's Allan. That's what
right.
was what Alan Block has it as.
Yep, no, it's literally, Contra 7 Part 2 is like what the fuck pops up. But there is Nairaland, which, what is this? CIA, Cocaine Importing Agency, Politics, Nigeria. Whoa, okay. This is like an old Nairaland forum. Interesting. This is, I guess, a Nigerian, like, oh, okay, interesting. Peter Dale Scott.
Yeah,
looks like he wrote.
I found a list on academia.edu. Which has an Allan George Palmer with an E. It's called The Most Secret List of SOE Agents, Special Operations Executives. I don't know what this is all about, but this does have
Peter Dale Scott here actually has a pretty banger article, Deep Events in the CIA's Global Drug Connection, that's got a whole section on Paul Helliwell and mentions kind of, I think he's basically... He's riffing off of like this book, the Alan Block books, essentially. Somebody posted on this forum like a 2008 Peter Dale Scott article that is pretty much a summary of like all the stuff in Alan Block's books, which is like we're already kind of going over here, but so I don't think this has any like new information. It seems like Alan Block is the only one to like, even though the arrest of Allan George Palmer is like pivotal to the entire Castlebank story, which I mean itself has been memory hold, but still, like you would think, even though, what about the acid heads, man? Like they love like celebrating their like acid manufacturer cowboys, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I get it. Owsley was like a Grateful Dead dude, so he's more famous, but
like, was he really just like some dude? Like, why did he have like all these like checks from Castlebank? Like, like
how did he get involved in banking with them? Like, it's so it out in California too. I mean, I know they had one lawyer with them in San Francisco, at least the Levenfeld and Kanter firm
from Florida to Oakland.
Yeah, it's mentioned here in Whitney Webb's book, actually, One Nation Under Blackmail. It's mentioned in Peter Dale Scott. So everyone is people have repeated this, so we're not the first one. There are blogs going back to like 2009, but I think
it's
all of them
that it's all kind of like in the same kind of network and like seems to kind of have the same sort of sources. You'd think that there would be like some more discussion of this guy. Maybe, I don't know.
Here's another, in German, LSD-Handlers, Allan George Palmer nachspürte, CIA, so like it's in German, but it's still just Peter Dale Scott article. Yeah, but there were a lot of people, like from going back to the 2000s and the blog era that were referencing this, but I guess nobody has, this guy's truly a ghost. Like, where did he go? What happened to him? who is Allan George Palmer?
Yeah.
Does he exist? Is that, I mean, they arrested him, so presumably that, like, we would know if that was not his name. Like, they booked him, right? So, and I assume, I forget if Alan Block, like, kind of goes into, like, what happened with his case. Like, did Allan George Palmer go to jail for a long time? Or did he kind of get, like, probation?
He wrote about him a little bit more in his book, Space, Time, and Organized Crime.
Oh.
He says that he was, since 1968, he was a major producer of LSD, mescaline, and THC, another powerful hallucinogenic drug, and quote-unquote grass dealer. It was a narcotics traffickers program so disliked by Alexander that had zeroed in on Palmer. As part of the government's drive, Palmer and 3 others, including an attorney who had clerked for a federal judge, were arrested in Marin County, California on October 17, 1971. We're talking about Bricha Jewish Migration.
But we don't know much more than that. Yeah, interesting. Well, Operation Lebanon.
Yeah.
Night and day are catching hell. People think are doing well just because I sing a few calypso. But that is my misery. Calypso don't make money, but most of them don't know that I have my axe to grind, just like any other man, existing in poverty and this giant ghetto land. But I intend to hang on. Tell them for me no dice. I ain't gonna eat lice. I ain't gonna grow old, sitting in the cold, not me. No way, they go have to beat me, they go have to eat me, or the heads go roll. Tell them I say I was born in this land, I go die in this land, nobody go run me from where me come from. Nobody go run me, lad, nobody go run me, nobody go run me, nobody go run me. Me mama must yam, me papa must yam, me woman must yam, me pickle must yam. Nobody go run me, nobody go run me, nobody go run me, lad, nobody go run me. Life ain't much for us to choose, some we win and some we lose, but sometimes life is so confusing. I had a lot of friends one time whom I used to wine and dine and gave them bread when they need it. Now most of them against me, take me, make the enemy, simply because I am not what they all want me to be. And with the political views I can't agree, but tell them for me no dice. I ain't gonna eat lice, I ain't gonna grow old, sitting in the cold, not me, LG. No way, they go have to beat me, they go have to eat me, or the heads go roll. Tell them I say I was born in this land, I go die in this land, nobody go run me from where me come from. Nobody go run me, nobody go run me, nobody go run me, nobody go run me. Me mama must yam, me papa must yam, me woman must yam, me pickney must yam. Nobody go run me, nobody go run me. Let go! 12 years I at CBC, work at Halcyon for free, when they went bankrupt and had no money. Because of my tolerance, they gave me the assurance the job belongs to me. But I hear some people high in our society, they don't like my calypso because they can't control me, so they plan to kick out my ass. Tell them, party no dice. I ain't gonna eat lice, I ain't gonna grow old, sitting in the cold, not me shorty. No way, all you have to beat me, all you have to bury me more than 6 feet and more. Tell them I say I was born in this land, I go die in this land, nobody go run me from where me come from. Nobody go run me, nobody go run me, nobody go run me, nobody go run me. Me mama must yam, me papa must yam, me woman must yam, me pickney must yam. Nobody go run me, nobody go run me. Election come and gone, some of them treat me with scorn, others put the whole point against me. Tell them I don't give a damn, I am going to sing my song exactly as I see it. Whoever want to make me a political enemy, who feel that they playing God and could wreck me life for me, tell them I ain't running away. Tell them for me no dice. I ain't gonna eat lice, I ain't gonna grow old, sitting in the cold, not in the shorty. No way, all you have to beat me, all you have to bury me, more than 6 feet or more. Tell them I say.
We'll move along here because, you know, there's still, this is kind of all stuff that, we'll get Sanford Clinton, you know, working for the Kanter firm, and stock fraudsters. Kanter's deals with Randolph Pace, a premier penny stock fraudster. Just all kinds of, there's some sus things in the 80s and the 90s, like, that would periodically kind of get, like, you know, caught by the SEC when you have to, like, kind of shut it down. There were lots of frauds involving, what was this Pace company, the Rooney Pace Group, which is like, I don't know, this boiler room thing. Anyways, sort of goes to show that, like, there was still shenanigans going on in the 90s, but they say that there's a company called Sports Track, which borrowed $400,000, and then there was an Antigua corporation called Ulster Investments Limited, owned by the St. John's Trust, whose beneficiaries were members of Kanter's family for $100,000, and Kanter's the holding company. I assume these are prosecutorial notes. And then Sports Track, like, I guess, collapsed. Anyways, there are Antigua connections, let's say. Oh, and this is why I think he brings all of this up. So on the last page of Sports Track Systems SB2 filing with the SEC in July 1999, under the heading Index to Exhibits, the following is listed. Promissory note dated March 2nd, 1999, made by SportsTrack.com, Inc., now SportsTrack Systems, Inc., payable to the order of Swiss American Bank, established in Antigua. Therein is woven yet another layer of the sophisticated criminality shared by Burt Kanter and Bruce Rappaport. Yeah, so Swiss American Bank of Antigua is one of these Bruce Rappaport entities. So I guess, you know, sort of caught the hand in the cookie jar on that one. And the next chapter is like about Rappaport's long time experience in Antigua, which does kind of emerge as like a hotbed of pretty sus activity. I think last time in Contra 7 we talked about how it was uncovered that there were like Israelis like training Contras on Antigua. There were like IDF Contra training camps, and definitely like this comes up again and again, like the amount of Israeli weaponry that ends up in the hands of like South American and Central American drug traffickers is striking, I would say.
Yeah.
And very interesting. So yeah, there's this guy, Marvin Warner. We might have talked about him. He was the U.S. ambassador to Switzerland during the Carter presidency. He says here, Rappaport shared many of his ventures with Marvin L. Warner and, of course, Burt Kanter. Warner's path to the embassy in Bern was the traditional one smoothed by money. He was a major campaign contributor and fundraiser for the Democrats. He'd served on the DNC and was a member of the U.S. delegation to the UN. His nomination as ambassador was sponsored by Ohio Senators John Glenn and Howard Metzenbaum. Sus Ohio. Wasn't John Glenn like in the Epstein book? Anyways, yeah, he was just that he paid off people basically for $60,000 in campaign contributions. So in the early 80s, Rappaport and Warner practically took over the small Caribbean island nation of Antigua, a British possession, cobbled together with Barbuda, another Caribbean island. Antigua is run by a local oligarchy dominated by the Byrd family. Lester Byrd, the deputy prime minister of Antigua, was particularly close to Rappaport and reportedly has received huge bribes and payoffs from him throughout the decades. The plan was to establish a banking system consisting of an onshore bank, the Swiss American National Bank, an offshore entity named Swiss American Bank, classic Rappaport, and a trust company, the Antigua International Trust. So SANB was licensed in May 1981, SAB almost 2 years later. The owner of this group was the Swiss American Holding Company, registered in Panama and owned by Rappaport's Intermaritime Bank and Marvin Warner's Home State Financial Services, Inc. of Cincinnati, Ohio. In 1982, Rappaport reportedly purchased a 75% majority interest in an Antiguan government-owned oil refinery, but in a U.S. Senate report from 2000, it's noted Rappaport's interest was 50%, and the other half secretly owned by a member of the Byrd family. This venture was called the West Indies Oil Company. So, yeah, there was a bunch of bullshit with this. The Antiguan depot was used as an oil throughput for product from Suriname and Trinidad, and later, perhaps, from the former Soviet Union. Likely, it was also used as a throughput for false documentation dealing with oil and shipping ventures. So a place to launder lots of oil. Interesting. So, I guess Warner was a self-made millionaire from Birmingham, Alabama, and went into the real estate business and I guess like made a bunch of money and then moved to Cincinnati and got into savings and loans. So he bought one in 1952 and kept switching up and buying new ones and then branched out into finance and insurance companies. So in about 20 years, he'd made serious money, some of which he used to buy a private jet, a 600-acre farm outside Cincinnati, homes in Cincinnati and South Florida, along with extensive real estate holdings, a half share in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a new NFL franchise, an interest in the USFL's Birmingham Stallions, and in 1974, he bought 10% of the New York Yankees. Oof. The Yankees owner, George M. Steinbrenner III, was a friend and fellow member of the Ohio Board of Regents. Warner's two primary U.S. venues were Ohio and Florida. He bought Combanks Corporation in Winter Park, Florida in 1976. 3 years later, he purchased Great American Bank, located in Miami. Great American quickly became something of a headache for Warner, particularly as it was a major target for two federal undercover drug money laundering operations, Greenback and Swordfish. So, next section, stressful years. Federal agents seized this bank's records in 1980. 2 years later, Great American Bank and several of its officers were indicted. Yeah, the journalist Penny Lernoux summed it up. A Florida case now in the courts tests the proposition that a bank, the institution itself, not individual officers, can be charged with criminal activity if there is a consistent pattern of participation in a laundering conspiracy. The bank involved, Great American, is charged on 21 counts with sanctioning the laundering of $94 million in drug profits over a 14-month period. The indictment, handed down in 1982, carries possible fines of $7 million. This marked the first time that a Florida bank had been charged with a drug laundering conspiracy. According to John Walker, Treasury's chief of enforcement, the alleged failure at Great American to fulfill currency reporting requirements wasn't due to the actions of an isolated employee, but was, in fact, a bank practice. No. So Lionel Paytube, weird. Interesting name. Lionel Paytube, Great American's senior vice president in charge of commercial loans, worked all too closely with money launderer Isaac Catan from Cali, Colombia. He was thought to wash about, quote, $300 million a year, more than $1 million every working day. Catan was arrested the day before federal agents moved on Great American. When nabbed, he had, quote, $16,000 under the front seat of his car, $385,000 in cashier's checks in his briefcase, and a $1.2 million wire transfer to a Swiss bank in a satchel. Damn. In the authoritative account of Operation Swordfish by David McClintock, he comments that the Justice Department's attorney in charge of Operation Greenback, Charles Blau, quote, yearned to implicate Warner in the growing scandal. Fortunately for Warner, bureaucratic infighting among the agencies involved in both Greenback and Swordfish saved him. Yeah, so he had tough times. But then I guess after all that, he pivoted to working with Rappaport and set up the offshore Swiss American Bank in 1983. He says Burt Kanter certainly enjoyed the setup. For as a director of Antigua International Trust, he had a new vehicle for his always complex illicit escapades. As we mentioned briefly in the preceding chapter, Kanter established a company called St. John's Trust, whose beneficiaries are members of his family, with a loan of around $700,000 from Swiss American Bank Ltd. And from Ulster Investments Ltd., a company in which he is a major shareholder. Just to note, the SEC, in an investigation of Kanter's activities that began in 1997, pointed out that Kanter was, quote, a director of Antigua International Trust Ltd., and there's just all kinds of This is actually weird that the government was at the center of this investigation was the government's certainty that Ulster was created solely for the purchase of the unregistered common stock of Site Holdings Inc., formerly known as Site-Based Media Inc. I mean, hold on right there. You remember I think it's still around, but you remember the Site website. It's a SITE that was like the anti-terrorism like thing that would always get all the ISIS videos before everybody else and like repost them and stuff. Because I remember years ago, like, even when I was less noited, it just gave up like, oh, this is like a Mossad like operation. This is like an Israeli operation, like somehow, right?
Yeah.
I think even sometimes they would allude to like having Israeli connections and stuff, but like site media and stuff like that. But I don't know. I'd have to really like look into it. But it is weird that it's like SITE based media was like one of these companies in the early 90s. Because I mean, it would line up, but that's kind of a shot in the dark. I have no idea if that's just a weird coincidence or something, but that was a very sus website, like extremely sus website.
Yes.
I don't know if it still exists. Do you think it still exists?
Yeah. Are you talking like Site Global, like SIT?
Yeah, like it's kind of like a like it was a counterterrorism thing. Like, let me see. Why can't I find it? I'm not hallucinating this. There was like, it's like SITE. I think it has dots in between. I forget what it's like studying international terrorism, something.
I feel like I remember what you're talking about, but was it actually spelled SITE or was there a different spelling?
I'm 99.99% sure it was SITE. Like it had to be. Because when I read this passage first, I was like, oh, I can't even find a reference to it. The videos ISIS doesn't want you to see. Because I remember like they had a little like lower third, logo that they'd always put it on these ISIS videos that would be like SITE.
I did find a reference to it. Yeah, you're right. It was SITE. According to the site website, which follows ISIS on social media.
Yeah, there were trackers of like counterterrorism, basically. Did they go away? Like, did they just vanish? What the fuck? That's so weird.
Yeah, I'm trying to find what was their website?
It was like Site Global or something like that.
Searching
maybe like Site...
for international terrorist entities.
There it is, Site Global.
Site Intelligence Group. Yeah, there you go. Site Intelligence Group Enterprise. Yeah. No, Site Global is a different organization.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, I got
Site
them
Intelligence
They
Group.
also are called Site, but this is called Site Intelligence Group. It's at ent.siteintelgroup.com. Site distinctively combines human intelligence coupled with real-time data feeds of terrorist/extremist information about
Islamic terrorism.
Yeah, this seems like
Rita Katz was the one that like was running it. So the Israeli analyst Rita Katz, like she's like probably has a military
she's
intelligence.
Still the executive director.
Oh yeah. Like her other work, Terrorist Hunter: The Extraordinary Story of a Woman Who Went Undercover to Infiltrate the Radical Islamic Groups Operating in America. No. So, I mean, like, she was an undercover...
She was born in Basra in southern Iraq to a wealthy Iraqi Jewish family. After the Six-Day War and shortly after Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath Party seized power in Iraq in 1968, her father was arrested on charges of spying for Israel. The family's property was confiscated by the state, and the rest of the family put under house arrest in a stone hut. The following year, after having been tortured, Katz's father was convicted and executed in a public hanging in Central Square of Baghdad, witnessed by more than 500,000 Iraqis. Katz's mother managed to escape with her 3 children. She managed to escape to Iran, from where they made their way to Israel. The family settled in the seaside town of Bat Yam. While in Israel, Katz set up in the Israeli Defense Forces and studied politics, history, and Middle Eastern studies at Tel Aviv University. All right. Oh, wow. She worked for the research institute called Investigative Project, run by journalist Steve Emerson, who's really a psycho. He was the guy who like spied on like a bunch of American Muslim groups, basically.
His Wikipedia photo is crazy.
Yeah,
he's
He
crazy.
looks pure evil. It looks like he's wearing
ginger.
a mask of a basically like a wax
frazzle
mask.
drip.
Yeah, yes, it's very like frazzle drip.
Terrorist Among Us: Jihad in America is one of his big books. Wow, used to work for Frank Church of Idaho. Interesting. Oh, but see, he's one of these guys, kind of like the late Senator Bob Graham of Book and Snake, membership. Who, he wrote Secret Warriors. I haven't read that book, but I've seen it. Inside the covert military operations of the Reagan era, which is very critical of Ronald Reagan. And he started in 1982 writing about the influence of Saudi Arabia on U.S. corporations, law firms, PR outfits, and educational, influence. So, I mean, I think it's like. Yeah, he wrote his first book was The American House of Saud: The Secret Petrodollar Connection, and it's kind of like Bob Graham in that he's trying to uncover corruption, but like he kind of apprehends this like, oh, the Muslims are coming over here. Is like, it's like Bob Graham would always harp on like the Saudis kind of like did 9/11, and it's like involved, Sure. Yeah, I think so. But like kind of I'm a little sussed out by saying like they did it and like we like behind our backs, behind the backs of like the entire intelligence apparatus. Like and the ruling class and everything else. Like I don't quite buy that. So that's an interesting career. Did he kind of like veer more just into like a crazy Islamophobic direction?
Veer more in a crazy Islamophobic direction. I think that it like developed over time, but he definitely always kind of had that streak to him. I think he always kind of saw it that way, but it didn't quite come through early on. I remember like, reading a little bit about this guy's background and thinking that he had like a weird career early on where he kind of was, like a, quote unquote parapolitics guy or whatever, but yeah, then he like these days he's, I think just like a, maniac. He left CNN he used to work for CNN. He left CNN in 1993 to work on a documentary, Terrorists Among Us, Jihad in America. The poster for this, the cover for this film is really insane.
Oh my God. I forgot about a lot of this, like this fucking video intrigue, because they founded SITE right after 9/11. And in October 2007, it was revealed that Katz had discovered and issued to the Bush administration a copy of an Osama bin Laden video, which had yet to be released by Al-Qaeda. Katz issued the video via a private link to the SITE webpage to White House counsel Fred Fielding. Within 20 minutes, computers registered to various parts of the executive branch began downloading the video, and within hours a transcript referencing SITE had appeared on Fox News. Katz had requested the webpage remain confidential. She said the premature disclosure tipped Al-Qaeda to a security breach and destroyed a surveillance operation to intercept and pass along secret messages, videos, and advance warnings of suicide bombings from the terrorist group communications network. The U.S. government didn't refute her claims. What the fuck? So apparently, according to Richard Clarke's book, he said that her and Stephen Emerson were providing the White House with a stream of information about possible Al-Qaeda activity inside the U.S. that was apparently largely unknown to the FBI before 9/11. They gave Clarke and his staff the names of Islamic radical websites, the identities of possible terrorist front groups, and the phone numbers and addresses of possible terror suspects. Data Clarke was unable to get from elsewhere in the government. I'm sorry, but Jesus, I can only imagine what kind of names they were digging up, and just
I also feel like
what the fuck?
This Wikipedia page
is
probably
I'm reading between the lines
as
as I read all this shit. They were assets. They're clearly assets of some kind, and I don't know. Very, very sus. But again, I don't know. I mean, it could just be SITE Holdings or SITE. Why would you spell SITE like that? It's just random. But it's not. It's also not like an acronym the way these companies were set up.
No, I'm not sure if it has anything to do with what was mentioned there. But this is definitely sus, and it reminds me of similar organizations like Memory. Like
Memory. I think even a lot of leftist people that always bothered me a little bit when people make just memes out of a Saudi guy on Memory saying something ridiculous, but it's kind of it's sort of coded as cool, man, but he's saying something that's probably mistranslated and worse than in a lot of cases. You can't trust the translation from Memory if you don't speak Arabic. That's always been my assumption.
Kind of I've always hated obviously I say inshallah, I call things haram, I'm Muslim, I'm a practicing Muslim. It's I've always hated the not to gatekeep or anything, but I don't like when people use those terms as a joke, it always bothered me, and I feel that's kind of in the same genre. It's not really, it's laughing at people who in some cases I'm not to say there aren't crazy people on Arab television. If you just not if you do the Media Matters thing and just watch hours and hours of Arab TV, you're gonna find people saying insane things, I'm sure. However, it obviously it's designed to serve a propaganda purpose, and I always found the whole thing of that's haram to be obnoxious personally.
No, I think there's a specific
joking,
way,
sneering about it, joking about it,
I think there's sometimes when people say it in a kind of they use it sincerely. That they're not Muslim, but they use it sincerely. I think.
Right, I don't mind people using the Arabic word for forbidden if they want to, if they are actually being sincere. But I don't know. It's partially a vibes thing.
But I know what you mean. I know what you mean by the jokey inshallah, the jokey haram, that kind of thing where it's just yeah.
Wouldn't it be crazy if someone was religious and they believe that something was religiously forbidden?
Exactly. By the way, the guy who managed SITE Holdings or SITE-based media in the early 90s, was Robert Landau, who I guess did that despite his conviction in 1989 for, quote, attempting to defraud the U.S. Olympic Committee and Miller Brewing. Wow. Defrauding my favorite domestic beer. Unacceptable. Yeah, so this is like a sus boiler room thing that was all kind of swirling around Antigua. Warner, this guy, I think some of his banks started becoming insolvent and blah, blah, blah. I think long story short, the SEC really came after him. And I believe did he kill himself? Oh, wait, no, he didn't. I mean, I was thinking of somebody else. There was another character. Wait, no. I'm sorry. There was a guy involved in this, Stephen Arkey. When all these things started collapsing, he could no longer take the pressure and committed suicide, shooting himself in the head. A month earlier, he had attempted suicide by overdosing on pills. He was 42 years old. Oh, but it says no. He would not be the only ESM-related suicide. That was the other company they were involved with. Warner was charged in 1985 on 50 felony counts emanating from this home state debacle. Then the SEC charged him with fraud. Then he was indicted by a federal grand jury in Ohio. By 1987, he'd been sentenced to 32 years in prison, 5 years on probation. Now, he ended up only serving 28 months in a federal prison in Florida and was able to keep his 160-acre horse farm and avoid paying $12 million in restitution because of Florida's archaic law on property debtors. But wait, he doesn't say whether he killed himself. He said it would, like he said, that's not the only related suicide. Maybe he gets to it. No, I think he was. Actually, no, sorry. So he goes back to Swiss American Bank. Warner had given an $800,000 promissory note to Swiss American in 1982 to comply with some net worth requirements. By that February, he was 4 months behind in the interest payments and owed almost $30,000. Now there's a little side note here, which is also interesting with Antigua, that gets into some MK, gets into some COINTELPRO, and some Irish shit. So this is Swiss American and the Irish question. Writer Robert Coram, author of Caribbean Time Bomb, The United States Complicity in the Corruption of Antigua, noted that, quote, more than $7 million thought to belong to the Irish Republican Army mysteriously turned up in Swiss American Bank. Coram was very close to the mark. The IRA money that ended up in Swiss American came from the activities of a ring of IRA sympathizers and multi-ton marijuana smugglers in the Boston area. The boss of the smuggling operation was IRA advocate James Whitey Bulger, ably assisted by Joseph Murray Jr. and Murray's brother Michael. They were Boston Irish Americans with strong ties to Italian-American mobsters and to the large Irish-American communities in the greater Boston area. What no one knew at the time, however, was that Bulger had been a, quote, top echelon informant for the FBI since February 1976 and was permitted to continue his criminal career, including murder, as long as he informed on Italian-American gangsters. Yeah, I think what came out much more recently after they caught him and everything, hiding in Santa Monica for years, is that he was like an MK Ultra subject as well, right? Like they gave him LSD back in like the 60s or the early 70s. Around the same time, he became like this, I don't know, program to kill FBI informant.
Yeah.
Anyways, so Joseph Murray, who had a legit job as a compositor at Boston Globe, had been described by writer John Loftus as, quote, a willing soldier in the provisional wing of the IRA, though others have contended he was a gangster who styled himself a freedom fighter, telling some people he was a member of the IRA. In 1984, the IRA needed a quick infusion of weapons in order to implement a widening of their war against Britain's military occupation of Northern Ireland. Murray arranged the arms shipment, hiring a skipper, Bob Anderson, whose fishing trawler, the Valhalla, which was secretly owned by Murray, was loaded on the night of September 13th with 7 tons of weapons, including M16 rifles, breech-loading shotguns, .357 Magnum revolvers, devices to adapt Browning machine guns to fire anti-aircraft rounds, and more than 70,000 rounds of ammo. The Valhalla headed to sea at 1 a.m. on September 14th. The plan was to rendezvous off the coast of Ireland with an Irish ship, the Merida Ann, to transfer the weapons. The operation failed, however, having been blown by an IRA informant. The British and Irish police were waiting. One of the participants, John McIntyre, who worked for Murray in drug deals, was murdered in Boston by either the IRA, which thought he was the informant, by British intelligence, which knew that he wasn't, or by Bulger, who was told by his FBI controller that McIntyre was informing on the Bulger-Murray connection. The real informant on the Valhalla operation, it turned out, was Sean O'Callaghan, a long-term British undercover operative active in the IRA. No! Wow, so they ended up killing the wrong guy. Just, you can't trust anybody in this game. Wow. So, although the Valhalla operation was a disaster, IRA money mixed with Bulger's and the Murray's proceeds from drug smuggling already enjoyed a safe haven in several British Caribbean possessions. One route was through St. Kitts under the direction of Dr. William Herbert, who was, at one time or another, St. Kitts Deputy Prime Minister, its U.S. Ambassador, its representative to the OAS, or its ambassador to the UN. Quote, immensely rich, Herbert was also the founder of the People's Action Movement, the political party that had ruled St. Kitts since 1980. The money was deposited in an account controlled by Herbert at the Caribbean Commercial Bank in St. Kitts. Herbert was a director of Caribbean Commercial and its legal counsel as well. The money was then moved to an account at Swiss American. The general manager of Swiss American Bank Limited, Swiss American National Bank, and the Antigua International Trust at the time was Peter F. Harrington, and the manager was McAllister Abbott. Herbert was never charged with money laundering, although his name was so prominently mentioned in FBI reports dealing with the Valhalla case that he resigned his post at the UN and for the U.S. when the case came to trial in 1987. Damn, 7 years later, he was murdered when his fishing boat was blown up. That sounds like an IRA way to...
Yeah.
Anyways, so
Oof.
Interestingly here,
It's like
there's
a Mark
immediately...
McDonough,
yeah, right. There was immediate speculation in the press that this was an IRA operation of revenge against Herbert. The speculation was correct, though no one quite understood what the IRA thought Herbert had done to so aggravate it. It turned out that Herbert had done nothing. Instead, the murders stemmed from a British intelligence operation that had secretly moved some portions of the IRA's money from Swiss American and parked it in a Channel Islands bank. Mayhem was the result. Damn, so they like jacked a bunch of their money out of the dirty Rappaport bank and put it somewhere else and made it look like Herbert did it. And then they blew up his boat and killed him. Jesus, some sicko shit.
Yeah.
Anyways, those British, I mean, they really, you see really the gloves off when they did with the Irish.
Yes, exactly. They think that it was all 100% justified. They had to do what they had to do. They kind of had like Zionist brain when it came to the IRA. They were like, our existence
I think
is being
so, yeah.
threatened. Like,
Mhm.
yeah.
Too close to home.
Yeah.
So it says the second route for laundering IRA and drug money, involving just about the same cast of Boston criminals, turned up in racketeering and money laundering charges handed down by a U.S. federal grand jury in 1993. The principals charged were Joseph Cardone and John F. Fitzgerald. So Cardone was working for the Murrays in the marijuana racket, and then he was directed to set up Halcyon Days Investments Limited on St. Lucia and open a bank account in the company's name. This was a sophisticated money laundering operation that sent millions of dollars to various banks in the Caribbean, including Swiss banks in Antigua and Anguilla. As far as Antigua goes, the only resident bank, either Swiss or owned by a Swiss bank at that time, was Swiss American. All right. And, okay, to make matters more interesting, Michael Murray, the IRA marijuana smuggler, was also indicted, and during the course of his prosecution admitted his role in the money laundering scheme. In 1994, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The government learned between 1985 and 1987 more than $7 million was deposited in accounts at Swiss American's Antiguan branches under the names of, quote, foreign shell corporations set up by Fitzgerald on the advice and under the supervision of General Manager Harrington. So they had Rosebud Investments, White Rose Investments, Handel Investments, Harlequins, Hoylake, and Saracens, named after the British rugby teams, etc. So a lot of money laundering. Interesting with the IRA in the 80s too, because some of them also went to Libya and trained at like the World Revolutionary Center under Gaddafi during that kind of like third, whereas where a lot of people like the RUF and Charles Taylor's people and other like revolutionary groups of varying susness, I think, like trained. Anyways, so there's more Antigua stuff, but I think maybe it's better to like move on since we basically know that we don't want Rappaport's not going to make us read all of his shell company names, just endlessly. Like you kind of get the deal. So Rappaport did claim that he's had nothing to do with Swiss American since he sold it in 1987. He was backed up by several of his intimate cronies, including Saul Frumkin, the guy like on the editorial board, who like I guess failed to catch this article about Rappaport, right? Who is now apparently Saul Frumkin has become a self-proclaimed guru on the prevention of money laundering and international organized crime. Wow, amazing. Yeah, so they're talking about the late 80s, and they say that that Rappaport purportedly learned of Harrington's drug money laundering connection and concocted a plan to distance himself from the issue. One part of this maneuver was to send his bully boys, Frumkin and the Kanter firm, I think in 87 this would be like Neil Gerber Eisenberg, to warn off anyone who looked too closely at Swiss American. Secondly, Rappaport maintained that he had absolutely nothing to do with Swiss American and that all he had was a charitable foundation in Bermuda. So there was a lot of like lawsuits after that where, his American lawyers were... Block loves saying bully boy, like tactics. Like he's brought it up a couple times now. But that is Kanter's firm known for their bully boy tactics. Anyways, so there's Panamanian trusts. Actually, now I think maybe we'll stop here. Israelis, guns, and a melon farm. All right. Swiss American was hip deep in ever more crime and corruption, which Harrington and the rest of the usual suspects were involved. It was discovered in January 1990 that Israelis had been running guns through Antigua to Colombia and into the arsenal of a Medellin drug cartel leader, Jose Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha. Israelis were also training his gunmen. When Rodriguez Gacha was killed in a shootout, the weapons were found and identified. They were surplus IDF stocks and included about 500 Galil assault rifles and more than 200,000 rounds of ammunition. One of the primary instigators for the covert arms supply was an Israeli, Maurice Sarfati, who owned a, quote, melon farm on Antigua called Royden Farms. It had been funded to begin with in 1985 by the U.S. Overseas Private Investment Corporation, OPIC, and sat on property that was coveted and eventually taken over by the boys at Swiss American. So the loan was for like $600,000. OPIC lent Sarfati an additional like $500,000 the next year. Sarfati did not repay the loans and was sued by OPIC in 1988. OPIC claimed Sarfati used Royden funds for his own personal benefit. Sarfati claimed in response he was the victim of bad weather. He says, during 1986 and blah, blah, 1987, all caps, unusually heavy floods destroyed all Royden's crops. And OPIC agreed to reschedule the payments. And a conspiracy in which OPIC and Swiss American, quote, conspired together to take over the form of Royden because Swiss American wanted to develop the land for a resort project. Moreover, Sarfati sought damages from OPIC for, among other things, having colluded with Swiss American to place, quote, in charge of the project an inexperienced farm manager from Puerto Rico, one Shaul Zahavi, who had bankrupted a large farm in Puerto Rico for $18 million. He added that Rappaport and Zahavi were cronies. Sarfati was a very busy fellow. He had bribed the Antiguan government to allow him to steal scarce public water for his melon project, bribed government official Veer Bird Jr. to make him the managing director of Antigua and Barbuda Airways International, which was a shell company, quote, set up to handle kickbacks from British Airways, and bribed the Minister of Agriculture to secure phony promissory notes worth millions. Though the entire process was illegal and banking officials knew this, Swiss American nevertheless took the notes, which then technically became a loan from Swiss American to Sarfati. Wow, so as one might expect, the Sarfati deal with Rodriguez Gacha did not escape the notice of investigatory bodies in the U.S. The Senate's Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations took up the issue in a 2-day hearing at the end of February 1991. Senator William V. Roth, Jr., the ranking member of the Republican minority, was particularly interested, for 2 years earlier, he had discovered that, quote, foreign mercenaries, primarily British and Israeli, were training paramilitary forces in Colombia for the drug cartels. In the earlier investigation, the Senate committee had learned the two groups of British and Israeli mercenaries had worked with the paramilitary forces commanded by Medellin cartel leader Rodriguez Gacha in 1988 and 89. Led by David Tompkins and Peter McAleese, the British group's first mission was to assault the headquarters of Colombia's longest-standing guerrilla force, the Colombian Revolutionary Armed Forces, known as FARC. Tompkins had no regular military background, though he was an explosives expert and did spend 8 years in prison for safe cracking. What is this, like a fucking A-Team episode? Jesus. McAleese, on the other hand, had extensive military experience and left the British military for disciplinary reasons with the rank of corporal in the SAS, the British equivalent of U.S. Special Forces. Both had served as mercenaries in the Angolan Civil War. In 1989, the British took on another assignment, this time from the leadership of the Cali cartel. They were to plan and lead an aerial attack on Medellin boss Pablo Escobar. They tried and failed when one of their helicopters, flown by a Colombian pilot, crashed. Now this paragraph, it's going to bring up a guy. I'm going to explain it in a second, but this was wild to see him pop up in this. Block goes on. The Israeli part was more complicated and started earlier. The leader was Yair Klein, who had retired from the Israeli military as an officer in 1981. 3 years later, in 1984, Klein started a private security firm, Hod Hahanit, which translates to spearhead in English. The majority of spearhead employees had either served in the Israeli police or in special anti-terrorist forces in the military. Spearhead's first contract was to supply weapons to Christian Phalangist forces in Lebanon during the seemingly endless civil strife. Its Colombian ventures began in 1987 when Klein traveled there to meet with Lieutenant Colonel Yitzhak Mariot Shoshani and Arik Afek. Both men were Israelis with intriguing business interests in Colombia. Shoshani, who had been in Colombia since 1980, represented various Israeli firms, including, quote, the Bogota branch of Israx, a subsidiary of an Israeli firm, Klal, that had contracts with Colombia worth more than $250 million for equipment such as radar systems and armored vehicles. Afek was a weapons dealer, flower merchant, and travel agent. He was headquartered in Miami, where he imported Colombian flowers and ran a travel agency, Ultimate Travel, when not brokering arms deals. Through Shoshani's efforts, Spearhead was soon in business, providing,
just
quote,
imagine,
training.
Like how many like ayahuasca journeys were like sponsored by like Ultimate Travel.
Oh my god!
It sounds like such a like
Ultimate Travel.
I can only imagine.
Who knows? I don't know if that was hot yet. The the ayahuasca tourism.
I just can imagine what type of like tourist agency that was.
That was maybe the original Goa Psytrance travel agency of like, once you're done with the IDF, go down to like, Brazil or Goa and then melt your face off. That sounds like some Ultimate Travel. This is exactly the era when like Psytrance was like, or Goa Trance was like emerging, I think, or a little bit before. But, these networks were well in place. Let's put it that way. And also, I just got to call out there, I was shocked to see the name, but perhaps not so shocked to see Yair Klein's name, because I'm very familiar with that name from research I've done in the past, because he would end up having a pretty busy career in the 1990s, after the purview of this book, and would end up in Sierra Leone and Liberia, training the anti-terrorist unit of President Charles Taylor's military in the late 90s, and also, I think, providing security and training to the RUF, particularly in that Blood Diamond region, along the Sierra Leone-Liberia border. So this guy had a very long, significant, storied career, and I think maybe it tells us something about alleged, failed state pariah Charles Taylor, that, he got hooked up with such a figure who also was, I think I was joking when you look up on, like, Wikispooks, Yair Klein, he has a whole page, and the front of it is just like occupation, soldier, like interests, contras or something like that.
Yeah, right.
Wait, what is? Oh, wait, hold on. I have it right here.
What you said.
Oh, yeah. Yair Klein, soldier, arms dealer, nationality, Israeli, interests, contras. So yeah. This guy it's just an interest he has. So I mean, this guy was flying around the world, like basically, training sickos, contras, essentially. Like, I think you can kind of widely say whether they're primarily drug trafficking or have political motives. Like, he's basically, this is the grand distributed network of contras.
Each course costs $67,000. Each 3-week course. Sorry, $76,000.
Right, where you can learn how to become a true, quote, anti-terrorist.
Teaching basic military tactics with the added features of lessons in the construction of car bombs and remote-controlled explosives. Wow. So if he had 30 pupils,
for anti-terror, for counter-terrorist purposes.
Yeah, exactly. So then he made Wow, a lot of money. He made millions.
Yeah, this guy was a big deal, and he went to multiple African countries, I think, throughout the 90s. And as we'll probably see a little bit later on in the other book, there was an underworld interest in the whole diamond thing, actually, like earlier than I had thought. And some of these people in these same kind of like milieus were sniffing around. And actually today, there's that, I forget the Israeli guy who's like owns massive amounts of mines in the Congo. The name is escaping me right now, but that kind of colonial activity still continues. But anyways, this is interesting about this like, CONTRA training camp featuring Yair Klein in Antigua, training anti-FARC, who were at least, nominally, they were like leftist guerrillas that were like attacking the drug traffickers, right? At more around this point. So during the latter stages of course 2 of the second course they held, the Colombian police found out about the training and planned to raid the camp. Oh, I'm sorry. This is in Colombia where Yair Klein was training them. Perhaps the Colombians were also miffed because a, quote, death squad responsible for a massacre of banana workers in the province of Urabá had been trained by the Israelis at Puerto Boyaca. In any case, the training was cut short and Spearhead beat a hasty retreat back to Israel. The following year it was back, though in a slightly attenuated form. Only Klein and 2 others. Their mission was to instruct on bomb detection. However, that spring, Colombian newspapers published stories about the British and Israelis training cartel gunmen. In August 1989, one of Spearhead's pupils, Alfred Vaquero, was arrested by the Colombian police and charged with assassinating judges and court personnel. The on-site Colombian venture was over for both the British and Spearhead. So I guess their training was too effective. Anyways, in 1988, Klein had met with several former Israelis, including retired Israeli Brigadier General Pinchas Shachar and his partner Passant Pesach Ben-Or, who were living in the greater Miami area. They sold weapons for the Israeli military industry, IMI. I don't know if that's like a designation or an actual company, but I guess he's abbreviating because there's not an ink. So Ben-Or's rise in the munitions trade was backed by his patron, David Marcus Katz, quote, who controlled much of Israel's arms dealing in Central America from Mexico City. By 1977, Ben-Or had achieved the premier position in the supply of arms to Guatemala. He did so well in the business that he owned a villa outside Ramallah in Israel, so an active settler too, which had a handsome stable for his racehorses and was staffed by Guatemalan servants. Amazing. He also kept his yacht in Miami, not far from his other primary source of business. In testimony before the Senate, Jeffrey Robertson, a former counsel to the Antigua Judicial Inquiry Commission, stated that amongst their contacts in the Hollywood area of Miami was a man named Maurice Sarfati, an entrepreneur with close and very corrupt contacts with a number of ministers in the Antiguan government. The original idea was to establish a military training school on the grounds of the Antiguan Defense Force, which had only 92 men, and there provide training for cartel gunmen. Okay, so that's it. Basically, Yair Klein gets kicked out of Colombia for training too many assassins, and they're like, fuck, let's go to Antigua and do it here, right? It's so corrupt. Additionally, the school would import modern Israeli weapons, assault rifles and submachine guns, that would be sold to the cartel students and taken back to Colombia. It was a weapons laundering operation with some training thrown in. Others involved included Vera Bird Jr. and the head of the Antiguan Defense Force, Major Clyde Walker. Jeffrey Robertson added that Walker reported directly to Antiguan Prime Minister Vera Bird Sr. and to Vera Bird Jr., quote, the so-called advisor on national security, although his real post was Minister of Public Works and Communications. The first deal was struck, and IMI loaded the weapons and ammunition on board a cargo ship, the Else TH, or Elsa, maybe Elsa TH. It's weird to think of a ship just called Else, like Else TH. The Elsa TH, which sailed from Haifa, Israel on March 29, 1989. Within a few days, however, the conspiracy began to fall apart, primarily from the impact of news stories, mentioned above, that appeared in the Colombian press in early April. In a panic, Klein and Shachar flew to Antigua, joined up with Sarfati and Vera Bird Jr., and arranged for a Medellin, quote, cartel-owned vessel, the Sea Point, to rendezvous with the Elsa TH when it was due to arrive in St. John's, Antigua, on the 19th of April. The rendezvous took place, the weapons were offloaded onto the Sea Point, and ultimately delivered to the representatives of Rodriguez Gacha. Wow. Jeffrey Robertson was particularly forthright in his testimony, pointing out that the Judicial Commission, for whom he was counsel, was created under a, quote, creaking 19th century colonial law and was unduly limited in its abilities. Nevertheless, it did establish, quote, endemic corruption, which has ruined Antigua by concentrating its little wealth into the hands of a few powerful men and their foreign hangers-on, including Sarfati, whom he characterized as, quote, one of these caterpillars of the Commonwealth, siphoning off U.S. aid money and OPIC money for his own enrichment and that of his local political cronies. No. So that's pretty fucked up. Yeah, so they started doing that. He writes more about the Swiss American and Rappaport trying to act like he doesn't own Swiss American. They mention here that Rappaport had an office in Gabon, which is discussed in a later chapter. So more African connections. All right, more about drug money. But wait, the correspondent accounts. This is something here. So yeah, another just like a blah, 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 million shell accounts. They steal all the money. They get away with it. But this section here, Swiss Americans correspondent accounts. That's going to be a very important thing, coming up here, is the notion of correspondent accounts, which to my somewhat not hyper high finance literate ass.
Yeah.
I generally understand what they mean when they talk about correspondent accounts, right? It's like you have a kind of banking relationship with an international bank where your customers can basically send money to a foreign bank. You can use your American bank to
right.
send, maybe to a bank in Russia, for example, and vice versa. And so it opens a money highway where you can funnel in and out. And also, I feel like the interesting thing that we're going to talk about is on the American side, it kind of provides this legal protection over this veneer of legality of, it's being received by a registered American bank with a good reputation. And so it can't be bad. But if it's coming from all these drug money laundering sources from around the world, from countries that don't have any regulations or have collapsed banking systems kind of, you could see how that could be abused pretty easily.
Yeah, because it's not really the money's kind of washing away because it changes currencies. At least that's kind of how I understood it.
Yeah. And as we'll talk about later, I guess the primary thing, for example, I think in Russia in the 90s was that, you would get cash wherever you got it from, right? From whatever source you got your cash from. And then you could deposit it in, say, there were certain British banks that Russians could have access to and deposit it there. And then from there, the British bank could send the money along to the Bank of New York. And by that point, it's we'll get into it later and maybe discuss in more detail. But nonetheless, it is a very, it's kind of the critical hinge upon which a lot of this bad, large scale activity happens later, in the 90s. So Block just says kind of at the end here, under Swiss Americans correspondent accounts. So, we have to also assume that if, there's one of these shady overseas banks and an American company opens a correspondent bank relationship with it, it's kind of a cosign that you think this bank is legit, right? I mean, I feel that's a general vibe, is that you wouldn't open a correspondent account with a totally shady, disreputable bank, right? So he writes that there was a distinct pattern of illegality running through Swiss American and its major correspondent bank, the Bank of New York, as well as other large American banks such as Chase Manhattan and the Bank of America. For example, Michael DeBella, discussed earlier, used Swiss American Bank and its correspondent account with the Bank of New York to move several million illicitly earned dollars. In 1996, after DeBella was sentenced, the Bank of New York finally, lackadaisically, quote, inquired about the matter.
Right.
The Swiss American response neglected to mention that John Greaves had long been, quote, aware of the frauds, and that Swiss American, nevertheless, continued to both open accounts and process transactions for DeBella. There are several other similar examples. So he explains the key personnel in the Bank of New York's correspondent banking department are the district managers and relationship managers. Bank of New York relationship managers did not, quote, identify any serious problems or concerns with the Swiss American account until sometime in 1995. And then some people started to notice questionable transactions in the account. Yeah, it was $90,000 in forged checks, DeBella fraud, other issues. Clearly, the relationship manager who brought this up was upset, but the Bank of New York did nothing but blow wind. In 1997, the correspondent relationship carried on without a bump. In the following year, however, the U.S. government informed York that it had sued Swiss American's various iterations, as well as the Bank of New York Intermaritime Bank, over the failed recovery of the Fitzgerald drug money mentioned earlier. Swiss American's response from yet another new general manager, allegedly unknown to the Bank of New York, was that Swiss American, quote, was not at fault. It was caught between conflicting demands of the Antiguan and the U.S. government. And I guess then in 1998, Swiss American hired another new general manager, its third in less than a year. And finally, on June 1st, 1999, the correspondent account was closed. They say the other U.S. banks with which Swiss American enjoyed correspondent relations acted about as diligently as did the Bank of New York. The most telling words dealing with the ever-miscreant Swiss American were uttered by a Chase manager in the waning days of the 20th century who said, quote, "My own unscientific rating of certain geographic locations includes the presumption, biased obviously, that anything from Antigua is probably diseased and contagious and should be avoided like mosquitoes in Queens. I hope that KYC, know your customer, criteria have been followed here. As the UN branch has dealt with international accounts for a long time, hopefully they were on the ball in these cases. Meanwhile, my head is going back into the sand on this one." This was a position favored by many in the world of international banking.
Man of criminals in the place. It's really a damn disgrace. You always have someone put to pass off quick. They don't care who pocket the pick, and when they belting, they don't care who they lash as long as they get some cash. All who want to play criminal and thief, don't let me see. I would run and inform the police chief immediately. All who feel it big and able, all who feel it so terrible. Touch me if you feel I'm making joke. And my dagger always underneath me cloak. They thief in truck, they even going with your pole and duck. They thief in old hat and old shoes, and anything else they could use. Some thief in big, and some thief in small. Some of them thief in next to not all. If you leave your house and go to town, when you come back, all your money you're gone. All who want to play criminal and thief, don't let me see. I would run and inform the police chief immediately. All who feel it big and they able, all who feel it so terrible. Touch me if you feel I'm making joke. My dagger always underneath me cloak. Hey, ay, ay, ay. Always long and sharp, so anything could happen. When you're passing by the market, hold on to your back pocket. If your money hide up in a secret place, they will find it right down inside your waist. Going to the law is the wrong thing to do. Policemen and all picking pocket too. All who want to play criminal and thief, don't let me see. I would run and inform the police chief immediately. All who feel it big and they able, all who feel it so terrible. Touch me if you feel I'm making joke. And look me dagger always underneath me cloak. They didn't believe in robbery with violence, but now they armed with offensive weapons. They're making fun. When they pass through your house, they leave it empty, and all you could do is to keep busy. You a bloody fool and only on. Brother is 6 feet under your gun. All who want to play criminal and thief, don't let me see. I was running in from the police chief. Immediately, all who feel the big and the able, all who feel it so terrible. Touch me if you feel I make it so. From the dog I always underneath me go.
The next chapter is about Iraqgate and Oman. We brought that up a little bit last time, and in Contra 7, and the Bechtel Corporation, which,
Yeah, they...
pretty sus, San Francisco-based firm.
Right. A lot of this was familiar from earlier episodes we did in this series.
Right. So I'm just going to scan and see if there's anything brand new, but I think we pretty much covered it. This Aqaba project, this pipeline project.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot written in here about the drama around basically the Iraqis being worried that if they try to build this pipeline, Israel's just going to send in jets and blow it up. And, there's a huge controversy over the interesting thing is that, all these parties kind of came to an impasse where the Iraqis wanted some kind of guarantee or insurance policy that would cover it in the event that Israel decided to blow it up. And I think from the U.S. perspective, they felt Israel was not, or you couldn't trust Israel to say yeah, for sure, we'll not blow it up.
One of the reasons why they were concerned about that was because their nuclear reactor had just been blown up by Israel with the covert assistance of the CIA.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, I can't blame Saddam
it was
Hussein
a reasonable
concern. About that.
Yeah, because it had just happened. Yeah, electronic transmitters were replaced on trucks delivering nutrition supplies to Osirak. The jets followed the signals in and took out the reactor.
Right.
Awesome.
Right. And so then a couple of years later they want to do this, and this is also during a very weird time where the U.S. government was kind of after a number of years of kind of freezing out Saddam Hussein, who I believe was a former CIA asset, before he took power in a coup.
He kind of still was, because it was during the Iran-Iraq war.
Well, that's what I mean is maybe they resumed their erstwhile relationship during this period, because then they reestablished diplomatic relations, I think in 1983. And then there's that, famous video that, people circulate sometimes of, Donald Rumsfeld walking up and shaking his hand and, as the special envoy to Iraq. And then also that's when I think we sold them a lot of chemical weapons and, a lot of dirty shit. And because that was part of a cynical game to play Iran and Iraq against each other. And we thought, they didn't want Saddam Hussein's regime to collapse, actually. It was better. They had estimated it was better for them to
they thought that Iran or the Islamic Republic might collapse, so they were really smarting from 1979 and everything, or they were really hopeful that maybe the Islamic Republic, Khomeini's government would just fall apart under the pressure of the Iran-Iraq war, which was insane and shouldn't be understated. How what a trial that
it's a pretty
was,
yeah,
especially right
that was a
after
brutal
the
war,
revolution, basically.
On both sides. I mean, it arguably also led to the economic problems in Iraq that sort of motivated Saddam Hussein to move into Kuwait, though he was also gaslit and totally lied to by U.S. officials that he talked to, because I think he really tried to get basically U.S. assent, consent for what he wanted to do. And he was told through various channels, don't worry about it. No, we get it, buddy. You got to do what you got to do. And then he did it. And then Bush is that line in the sand, New World Order, just freaked out. And they were waiting for him. And he walked into a fucking trap. And then it's all right, now you're going to be the bad guy this year, to basically kind of ritually beat up in front of the whole world. And the Soviet Union is going to be weirdly, because it's late Gorbachev, is going to be weirdly supporting the U.S. Just staying out of it, basically, whereas that'd be kind of crossing a geopolitical red line to invade the Middle East like that with the real Soviet Union around, not the fake one, but yeah. So then, I mean, also there was so much weird corruption shit going on in this deal that it does get a little bit into wacky Reagan administration like just sketchball territory. I think particularly Edwin Meese and a couple other of his, like William Clark, who was the NSA the first term, and Bud McFarlane, who was the replacement national security advisor, and Shimon Peres was also roped into this, along with the Kingdom of Jordan and Bechtel, which actually Bill Casey worked for. But Bill Casey, I think, had worked for Bechtel like in between stints in government. So like what they wanted to do, Bechtel, Great Britain, the British subsidiary, wanted to build a crude oil pipeline from Kirkuk in northern Iraq, which is now today, I guess, like the Kurdistan region, to the port of Aqaba on the Red Sea in Jordan. And so, yeah, all these, everyone's trying to get their beak wet with this. I think, like, especially Edwin Meese is just, like, constantly, like, harassing various people to be, come on, like, approve it. It's going to be great. It's going to be the best thing ever. Like, it's going to be blah, blah, blah. But meanwhile, there's this sticking problem of, like, what is Israel going to do? Because they could see it as, like, a geopolitical threat and just blow it up. And then we're all going to lose all this fucking money. Like, if you spend out, like, hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars on this pipeline project, and then Israel just blows it up, like, that's not cool, right? So they were negotiating, and then at a certain point, they kind of, like, reach an impasse, and then, let's see, I forget who exactly turns to them, but, okay, I'll just read this, because they were bringing a Japanese company at some point. They were trying to get a Japanese company to come and kind of, like, bankroll part of this deal and get a stake in it. But I think they got a little bit, like, sussed out because they felt like it was incredibly risky, given these things. Let's see. So, like, the original offer from Iraq and Jordan to Bechtel in late spring 1984, they offered the pipeline contract, but under four conditions.
We talked about this back in chapter 1, I think, the whole issue with the Japanese firm, right? Was this the same?
I don't think so.
Or was it chapter 2? Or is it a different one?
I don't think we talked about the Japanese firm at all.
Yeah.
Or maybe a different Japanese firm.
We definitely mentioned them, but it might not be the same one.
Yeah. So, I mean, these are all things like most of these points are basically to make sure the U.S. has to, like, have at least 50% equity. They must finance at least $500 million for the project, must lift at least 150,000 barrels a day from the pipeline. And all agreements had to be signed only by Bechtel, the Export-Import Bank, and American banks. This last point was to ensure that neither Israeli nor Jewish companies would be openly involved and relied upon heavy U.S. interests to restrain Israel. In fact, Iraq was adamant that it was not interested in any Israeli assurances that it would not attack the pipeline.
Yeah.
It specifically did not want the U.S. government, quote, to seek or solicit direct assurances from Israel concerning the security from the pipeline. The Iraqi conditions were taken seriously by the U.S. State Department, at least partially because the U.S. and Iraq were working to restore full diplomatic relations, which had been suspended for quite some time. Those relations were finally restored in November 1984. So, yeah. So Bechtel was, like, trying to meet those conditions.
I was thinking of Sanko Steam. The other Japanese firm he worked with was Sanko.
Oh,
Steamship.
You're right. Yeah. There was another group.
Different. This is Nisho Iwai. That he's working with here. If they don't know.
Yes. So that was it. Then there was one final thing. They were getting this together, and then Iraq added something else, a force majeure clause that would free Iraq from its obligation to pay interest on construction loans in the event of Israeli aggression. The force majeure condition became a sticking point that quickly threatened to kill the project. It was at this impasse that triggered the entrance of Rappaport. So sometime in November 84, he learned of Bechtel's problem and decided to do some lobbying in Israel and have a chat with Nisho Iwai prior to contacting Bechtel. So he sat down with Bechtel and Nisho Iwai representatives in January 85. Rappaport wanted Nisho Iwai to act as his front in the lifting of a far larger percentage of the pipeline oil than Nisho Iwai had sought, and he wanted to purchase the oil at a significant 10% discount below the spot market price for crude. In return, he would secure an Israeli commitment to refrain from destroying the pipeline and thus handle the problem caused by the force majeure requirement. What a bold proposal. Like, what a sus proposal. Like, just trust me, bro. Like, we don't need to have anything in writing, but, like, trust me. I'll just convince Israel. So, I guess, General Manager S. Sakamoto pointed out that in his reply that his company could not, quote, unconditionally commit itself on any aspect in connection with 300,000 barrels a day of Iraqi crude oil for 10 years, just like you cannot. Furthermore, Nishiwai had already stated it would assign all the rights, duties, and obligations to Rappaport's National Petroleum Limited, which was incorporated in Bermuda. Sakamoto added the following: as you know, the basic understanding of the parties is that Mr. Rappaport will negotiate the security which Iraq requires, and that he will fulfill the role of the real undisclosed principal for the oil deal, whilst NIC's main function is to appear as a token principal in the oil transaction with Iraq to assist National Petroleum. For understandable reasons, Nishiwai decided regretfully that it could no longer agree to the deal. The Japanese corporation wisely rejected playing Rappaport's beard. It was out of the game. So he was back to kind of square one. I guess at the same meeting with all these guys, he volunteered that he was ready to offer Israel a significant part of his profit as an inducement to behave. Bechtel bought the idea, but insisted Israel should also supply a, quote, political risk insurance package to cover the construction debt if Israel abrogated the agreement. In February, Rappaport got a comfort letter from Prime Minister Perez stating that Israel was amenable to a written pipeline security guarantee. It was clear, however, that Israel would not establish the insurance fund. Thus, Rappaport had to reach out for assistance to someone in the U.S. Now here's a name. He sought advice from an exceptionally well-known French lawyer, Samuel Pisar, at a meeting in the Paris airport. Pisar, who also represented Sir James Goldsmith, Sir Robert Maxwell, and would later work with the ineffable Roger Tamaraz on a BCCI bailout plan.
It's a funny thing to call a person ineffable.
Ineffable, yeah. He recommended Lynn Nofziger and E. Robert Wallach. Rappaport immediately flew to Washington, D.C., where he huddled with one of his most important American lawyers, Julius J. Kaplan of Kaplan, Russin, and Vecchi. The following day, he had dinner with Wallach. Just want to point out, for anybody that does not know, Samuel Pisar, we should really do like a whole thing on him one day, because I was a little bummed out that he only got one reference in this book, because I remember spiraling off when we were doing Contra 7 and I thought we were going to get to this book. I remember spiraling off in like a deep like rabbit hole into this guy as like a primary middleman. And, I think the most important thing, well, you saw right there, he was like the best friend and confidant of Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father. And I believe the last person to like speak to him on the phone before he mysteriously fell off his yacht, right?
Yeah.
But also he happens to be recording in the year of our Lord 2024, the stepfather of current Secretary of State Antony Blinken, right?
Oh, I actually didn't know that.
That is correct. Yep. So the stepson of this guy who was involved in so much. I mean, he was like law school friends at Harvard with JFK. He was an informal advisor to many different, presidents and political figures. He was based in Paris, obviously, very plugged into French politics. He also, interestingly, I'd love to kind of dig more into this particular like aspect, but I remember finding an article that talked about Pisar being the main organizer of a trip, and it was most certainly a trip to the Soviet Union, I think in 1985 or 1986, by a young head named Steve Jobs, who brought over a bunch of his Macintosh computers to blow their minds, man, with their trippy new computer technology. And like Samuel Pisar apparently was quite instrumental in arranging this trip, which I think occurred, it probably was 86, because it happened, I think, not long after Gorbachev took over. So this is one of the earliest like perestroika-ish kind of glasnost kind of things. But I also wonder, because as we can get into the later into this, that I remember reading things about, a lot of these young Russians getting computers and, who were maybe studying mathematics or, computer science and things like that, and getting like Western computers and then using that in the crazy period of the very early 90s, along with a lot of mafia muscle and, basically like no regulatory like system in place to like make a shitload of money and take over, huge swaths of Soviet industry. People like these oligarchs that kind of come up later in this book, who started off in like the like Komsomol cooperative thing that Gorbachev had set up in the late 80s that was like going to be a new kind of hybrid like market socialist thing. But then a lot of these places became like incubators for these like nascent capitalist entities to rise up. But anyway, so I mean, Pisar was like bringing Steve Jobs over to like bring over a bunch of computers and like and kind of open everybody's minds up to this or that. I just, and the Robert Maxwell thing, just, I don't know, sus. Yeah, and so good friends with Bruce Rappaport, the stepfather of our current Secretary of State, very good friends with, Bruce Rappaport.
Right.
Not exactly surprising. So Rappaport, when he met with Wallach, this lawyer, Robert Wallach, who was recommended by Pisar, Rappaport offered Wallach a large fee to help convince someone in the Reagan administration to pressure someone in the U.S. to come up with the insurance. Within hours, Wallach telephoned his extremely close friend, Attorney General Edwin Meese. According to Wallach, they first met in the 1950s as law students at UC Berkeley, where they had paired up for the moot court debating team and became state champions. Meese thought it was a fine idea and called Robert C. McFarlane, assistant to the president for national security affairs, and asked him to meet with Wallach and Rappaport. McFarlane also thought it was a swell idea, and after meeting with them in June, ordered Roger J. Robinson Jr., a member of the National Security Council, to be of assistance on the insurance problem. The initial target was the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, OPIC, mentioned earlier in connection with Sarfati and his melon farm on Antigua. But OPIC was not difficult to convince and easily committed itself to $100 million for the, quote, security package. So McFarlane met with OPIC representatives. They raised their contribution to $150 million and then lobbied Citibank to commit $250 million to the insurance package. There was still a rather enormous catch to these commitments. Neither OPIC nor Citibank contemplated providing insurance without assurance that somebody else would immediately bail them out if necessary, which I guess means the taxpayers, I guess. Very cool. There had to be, quote, a readily available fund of money from which the co-insurers, OPIC and Citibank, could obtain reimbursement in the event a claim was successfully made, which meant, of course, either Bechtel, Israel, and or the oil lifters. By this time, Nisho OI had dropped completely out of the picture, replaced by a small Houston, Texas company, Adams Resources and Energy, which was incorporated in Delaware. Rappaport's lawyer, Jay Kaplan, it was reported, had sent a draft memorandum of understanding to Bechtel back in June, which demanded Nisho EY be dumped, although it appears they were already trying to get out. So then, in anticipation of this, Rappaport had contacted K.S. Bud Adams, the head of Adams Resources, and he agreed to be the beard for this deal, right? So that it wouldn't look like there was like Israeli like money behind this, basically. So he talks about like changing the names, like making shell companies versions of Adam, and
right,
it says oddly Bechtel did not know who Bud Adams really was. Like it's all very
there's a funny, and it was on September 11th. 1985, David Loss, an attorney for Rappaport's International Maritime Services, informed the president of Banque Paribas in Geneva that a Bermuda corporation, Egyptian Natural Petroleum Limited, would change its name to Adams Resources Crude Oil Bermuda, Inc. 9 days later,
Yes.
Paul Emery of International Maritime Services teletexted a note to the Bank of Bermuda, which stated the following: "We confirm our principal's request to change the name of Walsall Limited to Adams Resources Crude Oil Bermuda Limited. There were now two very closely affiliated Adams Resources firms established in Bermuda, from which Rappaport expected to make $200 million a year. Oddly, Bechtel did not know, who Bud Adams really was. Right. Yeah, therefore, Rappaport sent a teletext to Eugene Moriarty of Bechtel, Great Britain, in which he explained that the Adams family comprised the founders, chief executive officers, and chairman of Phillips Petroleum. Adams Resources may not have been very much, but Phillips certainly was." All right, there you go.
Phillips Petroleum, KPFA, Lou Hill. Yeah. Yeah. So then, he successfully hid the kind of money transfers between Wallach and Rappaport. Then they bring up, there's another weird thing called like Lovelace SA, which is a company registered in Panama. That was the company through which like Jay Kaplan, Rappaport's lawyer, was getting paid. Like sometimes it came from an account controlled by Rappaport's Intermaritime Services with the intriguing name Lovelace SA. Yeah. Also, his attorneys from Skadden, Arp, Slate, Maher, and Flom. It's a pretty well-known law firm. Received money through Lovelace as well. Block says that what makes Lovelace so interesting, which I think it feels like it's a reference to, like, Linda Lovelace, like the 70s porn star, right?
I don't know.
Like, I can't think of anything else Lovelace, like, in this era would, like, really refer to. But
maybe
it's kind of the first thing that comes to mind, like the Deep Throat, the star of Deep Throat,
yeah,
which also is that's a spooky association of, like, like Deep Throat and kind of about government scandal, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a couple of Lovelaces, but yeah, maybe.
But I don't know if there's. Did you see any other etymology for that?
Well, what else could it have inspired him? I don't know. I mean, he might have just liked the name Lovelace. It could be that, but no, I didn't see it. But it's definitely a name other people have had, like Ada Lovelace.
Yeah. Oh, you mean it could be like a person's name. It's not. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I just think about it because it was like a porn stage name. Then it would be. But what's interesting about this this Lovelace company? Yeah, he said what makes it so interesting was its utility in several Rappaport stratagems, which included paying the salary and bonuses for several Rappaport employees. In addition, Lovelace was involved in a very complex and long battle between Rappaport and the African Republic of Gabon. Basically, Rappaport ripped off Gabon by taking and selling its oil without paying. Gabon took the matter to international arbitration. Rappaport counterclaimed through the various offshore entities he had created. In the words of a judicial officer, he had created, quote, 5 plaintiffs composed of, quote, the ship owners whose claims were assigned to the, quote, 6th plaintiff, IMM, by an agreement made on February 8th, 1986. That same day, IMM assigned claims of the ship owners and its own claims to Swiss Oil Corporation. Therefore, in the battle against Gabon, SOC, the Swiss Oil Corporation, was obliged to account to IMM for any money recovered, and IMM was obliged to do the same with the ship owners. It was all a bit of folderol because all of the appellants, the ship owners, IMM, and the Swiss Oil Corporation, were owned by the same person, Bruce Rappaport. In general, the issues adjudicated were not going well for Rappaport. Gabon was granted an arbitral award by the Court of Arbitration of the International Chamber of Commerce in Paris in 1987 that came to $41 million, just about $41 million. The Paris court then issued a statutory demand for payment, which was ignored, as expected. The next venue for this disagreement was the Cayman Islands, where Lovelace stepped up to the plate and applied for an adjournment of the winding up proceedings for a substantial period of time. The last gasp of this legal game came when New York attorneys acting on behalf of Mercasp Corporation, another Rappaport shell creation, came up with another stalling technique. The attorneys were brought in by Cayman legal firm Bruce Campbell and Company, which represented both Lovelace and Merscap in the Gabon affair, and as luck would have it, just so happened to be the incorporator and protector of Bert Kanter's Castle Bank in the Cayman Islands. And so it went on, grinding away for just a little time longer. Attorney Kaplan commented that Rappaport was a, quote, supreme egoist who conducted extraordinarily shady deals, and Gabon was but one of many cases in point. Kaplan succinctly commented, the deal gave Rappaport an interest-free $40 million loan for more than a decade. There were similar other bleak house cases, said Kaplan when we interviewed him in Washington, D.C. Yeah. So just once again, like going through Africa, just ripping off people's oil. This guy gets around everywhere, basically. I mean, and so far it's like all scams. I mean,
it's all everything that is in this book is a scam. The only thing that he's ever done, if maybe he did other things, but if you go by this book, all he ever did was scam people.
Yeah, it starts to make your head spin after a while of the whatever supposed economic activity there is. Like these people just like often slide in, or that is the weird thing about money laundering. And sometimes I was reading in the other book about like these gaudy Russian nightclubs that were built like in the 90s that were like so big that it was like, and they were empty all the time. And honestly, you see places like that now. Like maybe it's just because like event venues aren't always rented out and like they're empty. But I feel like there's a lot of these like palatial, kind of like ballroom type places that are always empty. And it's like, what's up with that place? Like, or sometimes you see like some kind of little shop open up. I don't know how much you get this in where you are, like, in Massachusetts, but like in LA, I feel, and there is, not to stereotype, but there's a large like ex-Soviet population, Russian population here. But sometimes it's like, oh, that looks like a front. Like that looks like a money laundering front. You know what I mean? Like when there's sometimes like a business that just like doesn't make sense and doesn't seem to have any like economic activity.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I feel like there are things like that everywhere, but
exactly.
Yeah,
like there have to be
more common in certain places than others. Yeah.
So I don't know. It trips me out to think about, and almost to a point where like as we get deeper and deeper and deeper, it's almost like, Jesus, like, do you need to be like a money laundering front to like be a successful business in America, like, or something like that? Like it almost feels that way sometimes.
I saw like a very
you need that
weird,
hot money.
I don't know if this is a money laundering operation, but I saw literally like a porn store the other day, like a porn storefront, which blew my mind because like how do those things stay in business? Like,
you mean like an adult store?
Yeah, like it seemed to be like selling pornographic videotapes. Like, which, like in the age of the internet, like it doesn't seem like something that would be able to stay in business. Like,
right. I think that those places sell like sex toys and stuff mostly.
No,
now.
It was definitely like, a videotape place, I think. Like, or at least that's how it was pitched on the outside. I didn't go in. But, maybe, but it wasn't like a sex store like that. It was like definitely like in terms of its advertising, I got like, because I wouldn't have been surprised by that. I know that there's like plenty of sex shops, but it was like very weird, and it was like in the middle of nowhere too. Like we were driving, and this like very like long stretch of like desolate kind of terrain.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean you're right. Weird, like who's going out to like the store now?
Very strange. I guess unless like people have like a thing for that, but. I mean, I'm not saying that was. It seems like maybe a bit too conspicuous for that type of thing, but. Yeah.
But that is a type of business that often would get run by like organized crime outfits.
Right.
Like classically speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on the more like fringy side of things, and oftentimes like you can. And I don't know, you can get a cash business or something. But I think there is a lot of that, top to bottom, in like the U.S. economy. Mm-hmm. Like it's definitely a not insignificant thing, because especially in tougher economic times when, I mean,
I feel like also like I don't know, it was because. Like Massachusetts now, like, I don't know if it's like a statewide thing, but like, like gambling has been increasingly like legal and like trying to bring money into the state, like, and into the cities. Like there's,
also just naturally, like that's a huge like vector for like IRL money laundering, like casinos, because like think about it, any like drug dealer or somebody could go in there, like pretend to gamble for a little bit, like bring a bunch of cash and then like pretend to gamble it, and then like or trade it into chips and then cash out at the end like with the same amount of money, and then be like, oh yeah, I won gambling. Like you can't really check that, like kind of thing. And,
and this place that I saw happened to be near like a big like casino that was like getting built. I was like, what is this? It was pretty sus. I was like, what's this all about? Like,
well, those types of businesses I feel like tend to also like kind of crop up around casinos, because it's like it encourages kind of like blow your money on like fun.
I hate gambling, dude. I know that you have a slight like love for gambling.
I have like a soft spot for it, but
on a couple of times. But like as time's gone on, like prior to my conversion, I believe
we did play craps once.
As time has we've done we've definitely gambled in the past, but as time has gone on, like my tolerance for gambling, and also like with the sort of explosion of like sports betting and all that stuff, I'm just like
I think online gambling is extremely like sus and evil. Like it's bad. It's really bad.
Yeah. It's like a huge social ill.
They keep trying to legalize it, like in California and stuff.
And seeing like gambling institutions like emerge around here, like it's definitely had like a deleterious effect on like people in general. Like it's just not like good. Like what are you doing? Like going to a casino? Like it's a like come on, like I get it if it's like I don't know, like you're in Las Vegas like for a weekend or something and you want to like waste money and it's like enjoyable. But like to actually be like sucked into this, like thinking you're like to go regularly to this, like as like a habit, and think you're gonna like win somehow, it's delusional. It's like
I was up at an Indian casino near Olympia, like a month or so ago, and like every casino you go into anywhere in the country, it's got like the casino people, especially the slot machines in a way are like the most, because I do feel like people are kind of like hypnotized by them.
Slot machines that they're like the most evil.
They're the worst.
Yeah.
They're the worst. Even though I know a lot of people that like win money on the slot machines, but like I feel there's something about people just sitting there.
People occasionally win money, but like certainly like on the whole, like they're not a winning proposition.
They tend to have the worst
contrary
odds,
to what
like,
Josh Harris might tell you or whatever. No, he was into like
video
player. Blackjack. Oh yeah, video poker.
Or
right,
video poker, yeah. He was at Joker Poker. Exactly. Yeah, but no, I just think it's obviously like this highly addictive thing, and then also like the lights and the jingles and everything about being
it's like
in there.
That Twilight
like
Zone episode where the guy like goes insane over the slot machine.
No,
you remember that?
And
one?
As we know, this is all like stolen like pension money that like was stolen by the mafia and all these lawyers to like set up these casinos, and like it's the establishment of like Nevada as a hub for this stuff. As much as I have a soft spot for like the sort of like weird fucked up like cowboy like Western thing like in Nevada, like the vibe in Nevada a little bit, but at the same time I have to acknowledge its deep susness, like
yeah,
and it is kind of like the outer lands of like the settler kingdom where like the old Wild West allowances are still tolerated, and basically, gambling, prostitution, like it's not now drugs are like added to it. It's just not. I don't think it's great. It's on brand for being a part of America, but we're looking at Atlantic City where Mr. Trump and all these mobsters tried to like quote unquote revitalize it with all these dope casinos, but like I think it's pretty rough in Atlantic City these days. Like it didn't actually. Somebody made a bunch of money off of that. I guess not Trump, because he technically like lost money, which is hard to do. But
which is truly unbelievable. But yeah, I was thinking about like how I know people didn't like Ed Offerman's like take on the Las Vegas shooting, that it was like purely that he went insane by Joker Poker. But I'll give him something on that. I think that there's definitely something to. I mean, I certainly like people look into this event and they feel like there's more to it, and there might be some kind of like angle there that we haven't gone into ourselves. Like I'm definitely not about these like sort of like to me like kind of like dumb or misinformed theories like based on like blurry photos of like a random guy who people think is like MBS. He's like MBS was there, and like
I think the MBS thing was like a diversion.
Stupidest thing ever.
Like somebody might have just made it up.
Absolute Reddit bullshit. It is absolutely made up.
Yeah,
he wasn't even there.
But
there's nothing to suggest that he was there. Sorry, that's my. I'm not saying there might not be like something
that was like a red
deep
herring
event in some ways, but.
I think it undeniably feels like a fucking deep event, because that guy has like kind of like arms trafficker, like kind of, I don't know, like he has the vibe of somebody who would like pop up in like a Bruce Rappaport story about ripping off some like bank in Antigua, like this weird like international guy who just like gambles all the time but like has a bunch of guns and like like makes cryptic comments about like doing overseas work, and like used to work for like Lockheed, and I don't like very wasn't there something fucked up with like his brother had some weird I forget.
I feel like I remember what you're talking about, but like I remember his brother talking about him. But
it would be worth looking into the other day.
Yeah, but my point is that I certainly don't think it's crazy that like the sort of culture of like living by night and just like gambling like and playing those
it's not
video
healthy.
Games, that's gonna drive you insane. Like I'm not saying that like maybe there wasn't something else going on, but I don't doubt the ability of that stuff to drive him insane at all. But
it can definitely it can kind of like hypnotize people, I think.
Yeah.
And kind of like they just
can.
sit there for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah,
people like spending their like old people spending their social security checks like
in fact, I
at
think,
the casino,
I think that type of shit is more of like like form of like MK than like your sort of typical like the hypnosis that you imagine. I think that's like more effective actually like hypnotizing and controlling people, if you want to talk about that, than like, you know, like you're getting very sleepy and like those type of like, you know, leaving aside drugs, which I think are like an important element of like the type of like MK mind control that people kind of imagine. Like just like, you know, doing conventional hypnosis the way like stage magicians or like hypnotherapists and stuff like that like do, or people do like in a sex way. Like I don't think that stuff like can actually control you to the same extent that like these sort of gamified like hypno machines can.
Well, I think it controls you in a way more. I think if like it controls you in the way that like certain hard drugs can like kind of
true.
like capture
it's
you.
the same kind of dopamine thing. Yeah.
Right,
Absolutely.
right. Dopamine hijacking. Yeah. But anyways, there's maybe one more little section here.
Yeah. This is a good section to read.
About Rappaport working Israel.
This
so here we go again.
Quotes from some of his letters. Yeah.
Right. So they say that though no one would ever take the insurance plunge on the pipeline deal, Wallach and Rappaport doggedly continued on. Rappaport worked on his friend, Shimon Peres, Israel's prime minister. Rappaport believed that Peres might be able to induce President Reagan to pressure OPEC into softening its position. The most that Peres would do, however, was draft a letter to Mies in which he said the following: I am following with great interest the projected pipeline from Iraq to Jordan as a possible additive to introduce economic consideration to this troubled land. Apparently, an Israeli guarantee may help to pave the way to the construction of this pipeline. I would go a long way to help it out, but then discretion is demanded on our part. I shall be in the USA in the middle of October, and I intend to talk it over with George Shultz, for whom I have the highest regard. Considering the short while of my staying in Washington, I believe it may be of great help if George will be informed ahead of time. I shall appreciate your good office in this respect. I have asked my friends Bruce and Bob to let you know the whole story, and I shall depend on your judgment about the best way to handle this matter. The Peres letter was given to Rappaport, who gave it to Wallach, who had flown to Geneva for this task, to hand-deliver it to Attorney General Mies. Rappaport also told him that Peres wanted a response to the letter before his scheduled visit to the U.S. The Prime Minister was of the opinion that if the U.S. was not willing or able to deliver what was needed, quote, the letter should be returned to the PM and become a non-document. Mies got the letter, along with several memoranda penned by Wallach, who recounted that U.S. involvement began with Mies's arrangement for a meeting with McFarlane, but, Wallach added, what had started out on the fast track had apparently slipped the rails. He bemoaned two perceptions that seemed to have undermined the project and brought the unacceptable risk of public exposure. The first was the notion that Israel was being paid off not to attack the pipeline. The second, he wrote, quote, is a subliminal and often obliquely stated impediment to the vigorous momentum that is required for this project, that Rappaport was going to make a fortune on the deal. Wallach had much more to say to Mies about Rappaport and the Israelis. He pointed out that Rappaport had long been paying for private polls on behalf of Peres and the Labor Party, which indicated Labor's strong likelihood of continuing electoral success. Most importantly, he remarked that Rappaport confirmed the suspicion that Israel would receive between 65 and 70 million each year for 10 years from the project, and that a portion of the money would go directly to the Labor Party. Moreover, Wallach added much more about Rappaport, Peres, and the Israeli Labor Party. Within the context of what would shortly become known as the Iran-Contra scandal, Rappaport told Wallach that Peres was annoyed with the U.S. for foot-dragging on the project. Israel's exasperation stemmed from its action in getting one of the American hostages in Beirut released. Quote, Peres emphatically indicated that the release of Reverend Benjamin M. Weir was as a result of the efforts of the State of Israel and no one else. Wow, they got the hostages out. In addition, Israel was prepared to arrange the release of the remaining 6 U.S. hostages. Israel believed these good works created an obligation or debt, and that the successful completion of the pipeline would be an appropriate payment. Israel also could not fathom why McFarlane was unable to talk to Saddam Hussein about the significance of the project, particularly as it was of such geopolitical importance in the Middle East. Though the pipeline may have had an important geopolitical context, just about everybody else saw it as a private financial package that contained some fairly shady elements. Bud McFarlane said, in retrospect, that had he known money was earmarked to go directly to the Israeli Labor Party, he would have had Wallach thrown out of his office. Wow, okay. Doesn't like the Labor Party. I guess he wanted the Likud to get it or something?
I don't know. If Likud, yeah, it was founded in, Menachem Begin had already founded it in 1973, so.
We haven't gotten to the part of the story where Bibi comes in, but I did catch much down the line. He does make a cameo. Then, this next section is Wallach to Casey and friends. Block says by late September 1985, the project was all but dead as far as Iraq was concerned. They had actually finalized an agreement on a pipeline project with Turkey. And they say if that weren't enough to kill the Aqaba deal, Iraq's displeasure with Bechtel's price and its approach, along with the depression in the international oil market, certainly added to the project's clear collapse. Even Jordan, which had been a very strong supporter of the project, figuring its terminus in Aqaba would bring it substantial revenues, knew the project was kaput. The only enthusiasts remaining were Wallach, Rappaport, Shimon Peres, and perhaps Attorney General Meese. The latter penned a letter to Perez dated October 7th, 1985, in which he noted how pleased he was, quote,
we had
to
a
learn of
9/11
your
and
interest.
then we had an October 7th.
And on October 7th. Wow, it's a rough day. He said how pleased he was to learn of your interest in the pipeline project, which I believe will be of mutual benefit to the countries involved. He recommended that Perez discuss this matter with Robert McFarlane, Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs. Obviously, there were still deals to sign and U.S. political influence to peddle. That same month, Wallach was busy meeting with Meese and David G. Wigg, his new contact with the National Security Council. Wigg had been a senior intelligence analyst with the CIA, who had been loaned to the White House in autumn 1983. 6 months later, he went to the NSC as Deputy Director for International Economic Affairs, and 14 months after that became the Director. Rappaport's golfing buddy, Bill Casey, was also brought into the picture. Casey, Wallach wrote, made available to the two primary enthusiasts the resources of the agency in terms of background information on participants involved and strategy planning. Casey was also pleased with Wigg's participation, for they were old friends. In fact, their relationship began when Casey headed the Export-Import Bank and Wigg worked there. After they both left the bank, Wigg created a business partnership in which Casey was the limited partner. When Casey became CIA director, he brought Wigg in as a senior analyst. Still, the pipeline pipe dream would not die. A new plan was hatched to get OPEC to ensure it. Israel would assign a portion of its U.S. foreign aid funds to back its commitment not to destroy the pipeline. So they had to get legal opinions. OPEC wanted them for this. So they had to write this whole thing of is it even legal to they have to give back some of their aid, if they blow up the pipeline and blah, blah, blah. And, they got a legal opinion from this guy Gerson, who, kind of said that basically Israel would have to waive its sovereign immunity against being sued for the violations of the terms, basically in order to make it legal, because you can't really sue another country like that, or the U.S. doesn't want to establish that norm. Anyways, so Casey was interested in this, but it was kind of falling apart. At one point, Wallach and Wigg turned to Hank Greenberg, the president of AIG, which would become famous, collapsing in 2008, right?
Yeah,
I remember people used to say AIG was some kind of CIA sus insurance cutout thing.
I remember. I've never heard that before. I mean, I guess it doesn't surprise me, but
I remember being in New York in 2008, and one of those dorms was down on Water Street, where and it was right across the street from AIG, and right after the financial crisis started, they had fucking NYPD cops guarding it 24 hours a day, because people were gonna come by and throw rocks through the window and shit, they were pissed at them. So not surprising who they're protecting. But, they keep trying to get some kind of find some way to do this, but then failure, endgame. Wigg ran it past William Clark, who was the former, he was one of the California boys that Reagan brought with him, who I guess Block says Reagan named Clark to the number 2 spot at the State Department in order to have a, quote, spy keeping watch on Secretary of State Alexander Haig.
Spy. All right, nice.
Yeah. So he says Clark not only spied on Haig, but actively encroached upon Haig's prerogatives in, quote, developing Middle East, Latin American, and international economic policy, causing Haig to resign in 1982. Wow, Clark. Interesting. When Clark retired from government service, he teamed up with some of the major BCCI conspirators and organized criminals from the New York metropolitan area in a garbage deal involving the export of waste to North Africa. Wow. I mean, amazing career there. The garbage deal, dumping garbage in Africa, like amazing, with some organized criminals from the New York metropolitan area. Fantastic. So
beautiful.
Yeah. So Clark, I mean, but Clark actually basically was sussed out by this. As corrupt as he was, he thought that Whig's scheme to give Israel money looked like a, quote, protection racket. So he warned Admiral John Poindexter, the replacement national security advisor, of the extortionate nature of the deal, and Poindexter scuttled the NSC's involvement in the Aqaba pipeline in December 1985. But 1 month later, Clark turned up in Iraq, meeting with various government officials on behalf of several of his clients. While there, he also discussed the pipeline stalemate. Even earlier in summer 1985, Clark had discussed the pipeline with Iraqi authorities in Baghdad, but when questioned by the independent counsel about these conversations, Clark maintained he was not acting for any particular client in this matter. Yeah, so who knows what he was up to. But there were still games and blah, blah, blah. And that was pretty much the end of it. Now, I think this must be the last part of the chapter, but it talks more about the Sultanate of Oman, who I think we did discuss that a little bit last time. Also, the deep CIA involvement in Oman, which I hadn't quite appreciated, how
basically that whole area.
Yeah, because of the Sultan's Anglophilia, expressed from time to time in odd and passionate ways. Qaboos bin Said. Oh, Robert B. Anderson pops up, who has come up a few times, the guy from the Eisenhower administration. He worked the Middle East for President Johnson and was President Nixon's chief negotiator in talks with Panama over the canal. Anderson labored to bring Sultan Qaboos and the Saudi royal family together, and is generally given credit for the eventual establishment of diplomatic relations between the two countries. He brought this guy on, this advisor, Thomas Hill Jr., who wrote a number of significant Omani laws on banking, commerce, and, of all things, ethics. So, yeah, then there's this weird story here about another crazily named person. He says the CIA's hand in Oman was complemented by the presence of C. Sterling Snodgrass, who had functioned as a Middle East intelligence agent, reporting to Richard Sanger, former chief of the Saudi Arabian desk in the State Department. A frequent participant in both National Security Council and CIA briefings, Snodgrass passed information to Bechtel on upcoming U.S. government projects dealing with Middle East reserves and other matters. He moved around, and in 1972, he was brought in by the Omanis to organize their petroleum industry. Snodgrass was named the petroleum advisor to the Sultan, while also serving as an advisor to Jordan's King Hussein, right, from the famous family.
Yes.
At the same time, Snodgrass, quote, headed two CIA-owned energy consulting companies in Washington. He died in 1974. The CIA's presence was so pronounced by the early 1970s that C. Patrick Quinlan, the highest-ranking state official in the country, believed that U.S. foreign policy was being undermined by Anderson and others connected to the clandestine service. He complained to no avail to the State Department about the practice and about, quote, large commissions being paid by these unofficial U.S. representatives to two middlemen, a British military official, Timothy Landon, and Yahya Omar, who was a Libyan exile living in Oman under disguise, who were exceedingly important Omani advisors. Both of these men worked cooperatively with U.S. military intelligence and the CIA. Anglo-American intelligence neatly wrapped up everything of importance. The British directed the 1970 coup, defeated several guerrilla movements in combat, and trained Oman's special forces at a hidden location known as the Goat Farm. The Goat Farm, truly.
Yeah.
So then, here, Rappaport's associates.
The Goat Farm.
Right. I guess among those who cultivated Sultan Qaboos were Rappaport, Suslord Marc Rich, which I'd like to get into him later because, I remember him from my childhood when, Bill Clinton pardoned him. And like everyone was like, oh, he pardoned a criminal, blah, blah, blah. But actually, like Marc Rich is almost like a younger Rappaport, like an extreme Sussler. It actually was basically tight with Rappaport. So anyways, among people who cultivated the Sultan were obviously Rappaport, Marc Rich, and BCCI. He talked about the BCCI Bank of America joint venture, the National Bank of Oman, which helped funnel millions of CIA and Saudi dollars to Pakistan for the Afghan rebels during the 80s war against the Soviets, and how it was a way station for sending arms to Pakistan, etc. There was Rappaport's key operative there was the allegedly former operative, CIA operative Jerry Townsend.
Allegedly former. I like
yeah. John Cooper, who had become Rappaport's CFO after leaving Bechtel, said that Townsend told him he was still with the agency and had previously worked in Turkey and Zambia. He forgot to mention Burundi, with Maurice Templesman, also thought to be CIA, a well-known international gem dealer and devoted consort of Jackie Kennedy Onassis for many years. Templesman was part of Rappaport's group, according to Townsend. President Jimmy Carter's former budget director, Burt Lance, had no doubt that Townsend was CIA during his tenure with Rappaport. Nonetheless, whether CIA at the time or not, it was Townsend who put together the Omani deals. Rappaport, Townsend said, had lost his shirt with the Saudi deal, but nonetheless still wanted to do an Arab deal. Yeah. Wow, hanging out with Jackie Kennedy. I kind of remember reading somewhere about Maurice Templesman, like the weird international gem dealer guy, maybe before, but interesting. He made a small oil deal. Townsend added that John Deuys, a major oil entrepreneur originally from the Netherlands, whose partner was CIA officer Theodore Shackley, was already the heavy hitter in Oman, making $6 a barrel. But anyways, so then Rappaport was doing this sus thing. They talk about Abbas Gokal, the Pakistani shipping magnate who did end up in jail over the BCCI thing. He was a board member of Intermaritime Bank from 1978 through 1982. So he was in business with Bruce Rappaport. He was very heavily involved in South African embargo busting during apartheid and during when there were like sanctions on them, and also shipped a lot of weapons, a lot of stuff to Iran during the war with Iraq. I don't remember if we covered this, but one of Gokal's brothers, Mustafa Gokal, was a financial advisor to Ayatollah Khomeini, as well as to General Zia.
Makes
wow.
sense. Yeah, wow. Those are some big clients.
That's a plush client Rolodex to have. Like Khomeini and Zia. God damn. And your brother is like this huge shipping magnate connected to BCCI. Concerning Iran, a former manager of Gokal's Karachi office told reporters from The Guardian that they, quote, did everything for Iran. Everything, in italics. That meant war material along with a variety of other goods. Most importantly, the Gokals were involved in a highly secret BCCI deal that bankrolled a consortium made up of Libya, Pakistan, and Argentina in its quest for nuclear weapons. Now, I don't remember hearing that before, that BCCI was involved in like in like a BCCI bankrolled consortium that included Libya, Argentina, Argentina also, but particularly Libya. That stands out to me, that I hadn't heard that like I had assumed that Gaddafi had used BCCI to some degree, but I don't know. There's some weird there. Some of Gaddafi's dealings in the late 80s, like allegedly being involved in like plotting the assassination of Thomas Sankara, like training Charles Taylor. Like the dude was not batting 1,000. In terms of only bankrolling not sus things. Like, I mean, you know what I mean?
Only bankrolling not sus things.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I know people kind of like to be today, like Gaddafi was based because like NATO and the CIA completely did like brutally assassinate him in this like disgusting like psyop bombing campaign, et cetera, and hunt him down and like murder him, and maybe he was doing something that was like against their interests like at the end of his life, but in this era where he was kind of playing the bad boy on the international stage, he was just involved. I mean, he was involved in all kinds of things, like some good and some like I don't know. Okay, this little paragraph here we see another thing. So he kind of clarifies like the Iran-Contra like weapons thing, but adds some shit. Block says that there is a standard view of when and why the United States decided to sell weapons to Iran. It was supposedly the path chosen to get Iran to lean on its Shiite surrogates in Lebanon who had kidnapped several Americans. The view is composed of two closely related scenarios, which nonetheless merge into one generalized claim. The first was developed by President Reagan's Special Review Board, and remember this lineup? Chaired by Senator John Tower of Texas, and including Edmund Muskie and Brent Scowcroft. Wow, like, really trust those guys. John Tower, of course, would die in the sus plane crash, right?
Yeah.
You know, massive, like, alcoholic womanizer, had something to do with the or he got appointed after the JFK says, yeah, this is very sus, John Tower. Anyways, officially established by the president in December 1986, you know, the review board, this is like the bullshit commission about Iran-Contra, that the Tower Commission, that had no legal powers to investigate, couldn't subpoena anything, and only a couple months to complete its work. After approximately 3 months, the Tower Commission produced its findings, which were like bullshit, like, Oliver North did something and nobody else did it. The second chronology was developed by the National Security Archive, a private not-for-profit organization that functions to uncover the abuses of national intelligence. Both chronologies determine that the idea of clandestine sales to U.S. weapons in Iran originated in summer 1984, when international arms dealers, including Adnan Khashoggi, and most importantly, Manasher Ghorbanifar, a former Savak officer, Iranian intelligence, desired to move the U.S. and Iran into an arms relationship. The question of precisely when Khashoggi and Ghorbanifar came together is unresolved, however. One version has Ghorbanifar, who lived in France, presenting his bona fides in a November 1984 meeting in Hamburg, West Germany, with Theodore Shackley, a former high-ranking CIA officer. There, Ghorbanifar claimed to represent the interests and desires of Iran's Prime Minister, Hussein Mousavi. Confirmation of Ghorbanifar influence for skeptics in American intelligence was provided by the ex-head of Savak's counter-espionage branch, former General M. Hashemi. I don't know, but the arms dealers' machinations came at a propitious moment for them. American National Security Council staffers had vainly looked for a way back into Iran, a method that would provide the U.S. with some leverage. Weapons were always the first and foremost consideration, but they were still skeptical, little to look forward to. And so they said that there was a decided tilt toward Iraq due to its probably stemming from its recent poor battlefield performance. And in this National Security Council study that was published, it noted U.S. interests would not be served if Iraq were to collapse. So they called for operations to limit arms from third countries to Iran. Shortly after that study, in January 1984, State Department placed Iran on its list of countries supporting international terrorism. Iraq, on the other hand, which had been on the list for many years, had been taken off the dreaded list in December 1982 and was almost immediately granted more than $200 million in credit guarantees to finance sales of U.S. farm products. Much later, this would be understood as the start of a long-term massive illegal weapons deal paid for by U.S. taxpayers involving an Italian bank, Banca Nazionale del Lavoro, BNL, through its small branch in Atlanta, Georgia. This became known as the BNL scandal, which, all too lightly, brushed over Henry Kissinger, the elder George Bush, and Rappaport's dear friend, Swiss banker Alfred Hartman. In addition, the administration encouraged certain Persian Gulf Arab countries to increase financial support for Iraq, and in early spring 1984, sent Special Envoy Donald Rumsfeld to Baghdad to discuss improving bilateral relations with Iraq, paying special attention to the Bechtel-Rappaport pipeline deal. Damn. And Lawrence E. Walsh, who was the independent counsel guy who investigated the scandal, I guess the origins in 1985, but he said the Iran Initiative actually was a series of events that began in the summer of that year, and he says that supplying Iran was a joint effort between Israel and the U.S. Funny considering today. Israel sent U.S.-manufactured weapons to Iran 3 times in 1985, but Block says both of them are wrong. That's not true, which I was waiting for. I was waiting to see this here because if you go back to Contra 1, right, we've talked about how there was potentially something going on as far back as 1980, right? To like around, especially around, the embassy hostages. So I'll just finish this here.
Yeah.
Block, he says the U.S. sale of weapons to Iran was assuredly begun prior to the hostage taking in Lebanon. There is some intimation of this in a Congressional Research Service paper written by Richard Preece in January 1984. Preece noted that by 1983, a considerable illicit traffic in U.S. arms to Iran had developed. American companies were using South Korea and Israel as cutouts for both new weapons and spare parts into Iran. This was certainly common knowledge in the region, for Preece wrote that Iraqi officials were disturbed by this traffic and angered that Washington had done nothing about it. In March 1984, he noted, the State Department gave Richard Fairbanks, ambassador at large, the job of pressuring Israel and the, quote, friendly Asian states to cease and desist. But while there might have been some arms traffickers in Western Europe making their own deals, there is little doubt that many of the transactions in which American firms were using Israel, South Korea, and other nations to mask their sales were known and approved by U.S. intelligence and the Reagan administration. In the main, this was neither an illicit nor an illegal traffic, simply a very well-hidden one. Yeah, well, there's actually quite a lot of sustenance there just for, this is like not even, top 5 scandals that probably Rappaport was involved in, but nonetheless illuminates the central role that he played in all these networks. However, the first line of the last line I'll read is the first line of the next paragraph, which I think is important. In the netherworld of Iran-Contra, Rappaport's name has hardly been mentioned. I think it's true. Like in a lot of things about Iran-Contra, there are a lot of figures like this. I think Gerhard Meritens is another one who was involved in Iran-Contra, but then I think it's mentioned as like a footnote, like in one thing when, he's mentioning like U.S. companies were making, technology and sending it over to Iran. Remember, RF Durrani's Merix Corporation in California, I think they may have been manufacturing like helicopter parts for eventual sale to Iran. And then I recall that's maybe what RF Durrani actually got caught for, was like, oh, he was like sending things to Iran because they're a terrorist country now, or something. But obviously there's a lot going on. But I think we're going to pause right there. I mean, I think we're still marching through. I mean, I think there's more we have not even gotten to
really even get to the second book that you wanted to talk about.
No, nor the main point about Rappaport and the Bank of New York in the 90s, which like is and the Soviet Union.
We're not even really halfway through All Is Clouded by Desire in terms of our progress, I don't think.
No, we're not. Even though it's like, I get technically we are because it's only 200 pages, but technically we're at the halfway point of the book. The next part, let's see. Yeah, I mean, there's like a little more about like.
I just want to buy a copy of this book because the ebook is so like all over the place. But yeah.
Yeah, it's like tiny. I don't even know. It doesn't take up the whole text on the page, so it's hard to like judge like how long the book actually is. But I guess it would be shorter if the text was bigger, right? Yes, it would.
But you can make your text larger on your ebook reader if you want.
Oh, see, I'm looking at the PDF. That's why my PDF's in a weird.
I don't have a PDF. I want one badly.
I think you can get it off, one of those sites.
Yeah, one of those sites. All right, I'll look again for it. All right, but
anyway. Yeah. But we've yet to get to the main thing. I guess we're really, we're kind of charting from like A to Z here, from like the period of basically like World War II up through the 80s, but then the 90s. All this context is going to be important, especially when we jump to the other book, which has a lot of good information. But if you're looking for it to like explain to you like the CIA connection, if you look up like the mentions of CIA in the book Red Mafia, almost all of them are a CIA source like said, or like a CIA report said. Like it's basically just quoting the CIA as like their commentary, or like they were, according to this book, always kind of releasing these like reports about, Russian organized crime, but much less about the actual involvement of like, organizations like the CIA with these international crime figures, which, I think if you combine the two things from both of these books, then a richer picture starts to emerge where even though you still kind of have to read between the lines, I don't know, it becomes clear that, this is not just like, I don't know, a case of like criminals like rising up like because they're bad guys and just like taking a chance in Russia, blah blah blah, and things kind of everyone randomly just chasing around selfish things. Like there was, I think, an infrastructure developed to allow these sickos to like in some cases kind of emerge from the shadows and just like take over entire like whole industries in an even bloodier way than they kind of managed to do in America. But I guess we'll be back to finish this.
Yes, I guess we will.
I think in one more we can, we can kind of knock it out.
We'll see.
We'll see it out. We'll see.
4 is not so bad, but we'll see.
Yeah, we definitely will. But we're gonna leave it on pause there right now. But until next time, dear listeners, stay vigilant.
حبة